Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the January meeting in the Joe Herring Room in Baton Rouge. I welcome everyone here today, and thank you all for coming. If anyone plans to make any comments today, please fill out one of these comment cards. Please be respectful if you have anything to say, and try to keep your comments to 3 minutes if you do have anything today, and I'm glad everyone's here. With that, I'd like to ask Commissioner Samini if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. With that, Ms. Falcon, could you please do the roll call? Here. 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 Thank you very much, Ms. Falcon. With that, I look for a motion to approve the minutes from the December meeting. Moved by Commissioner Corville. Second by Commissioner Samini. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. That's approved by all. At this time, we'll do the approval of the agenda, and we have a change on that. That we're going to ask that I'd look for a motion to take the number 7 agenda item dealing with Commissioner Ann Taylor and move it to another meeting. If we can take that off the agenda and move it to the next one.
I would make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Pearson makes that motion, second by Commissioner Guidry. Hearing nothing else, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 6, special announcements, personal privilege. Any commissioners have anything that they would like to? Oh, we did not accept the rest of the agenda. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Cole.
That was a solid portion of my amendment. My motion.
Thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner McPherson with the amended agenda and a second by Commissioner Hogan. Any opposition here? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much for correcting me, Mr. Cole. Okay. We're back on to 6. Special announcements, personal privilege. Anyone has anything? Mr. Shadon, would you please?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, today is Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. I would like for our agents in the room to stand. On behalf of Secretary Montese, who, by the way, is at a cabinet meeting this morning, and that's why he's not here, folks. On behalf of him and our department, I didn't want to let the opportunity pass without taking a moment to recognize our department's dedicated, loyal, and brave men and women, the agents and the staff. It's not lost on me that many of them risk their lives daily, and on some occasions will unselfishly leave their own families to go out and rescue families who they do not know. So on this day, the National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, Colonel and all of you men and women here that wear the uniform, I and the department salute you for your service to our people and other men and women like you across this state and nation who I believe protect and serve because they believe in and of itself that is a badge of honor. So on behalf of the department and all the people that we represent, I really appreciate your service. Thank you very much. Now, can I have a badge and a gun? That'd be like Barney.
Thank you very much, Rob. The commission echoes that, the law enforcement people do a tough job, and it can be scary out there with people that have guns, hunting and all, and you're going into places in the dark and all, not knowing who you're going to be confronted by. So thank you all very much on behalf of the commission. With that, we're going to go on to recognizing our fellow commissioner, Mr. Robert Samany. Bobby, this is his last meeting as a commissioner here. He won't be lost on us. He's going to be around, and I'm sure will give advice and counsel to us all on fisheries issues. He's been a mentor to me and helped me a lot, learning the path that I take up here as being a commissioner. So with that, I want to say that I appreciate your time, Bobby, here on behalf of the commission, and thank you very much for the time you put in and your dedication. Commissioner Hogan.
Many of you know that this is Bobby's second time to serve. He's actually served a total of 9.5 years as a commissioner. And Bobby, you've done an outstanding job. It's been a pleasure serving with you. We're going to miss you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. If y'all, along with Rob, would you come on up here and do a presentation of the plaque to Bobby?
The Robert Replenishment, Protection, Enhancement, Research, Development, and Education for the Social and Economic Benefits of Current and Future Generations. Wildlife and Fisheries Commission, January 9th, 20. Thank you for your service, Mr. Here.
I'd like to thank everyone for this award. I feel honored to be able to serve on this commission, represent all the natural resources of Louisiana, especially our commercial seafood. It's a privilege to be able to serve up here. You're constantly learning from the staff, the wildlife and fishery. I wish I could shake every employee of this department's hand and say thank you. for what they taught me over the years. It's a good thing, what y'all got going on over here, and I know y'all gonna keep it going. Thank y'all very much.
Moving on, we're going to go on to the item number 8 to present the NASDLA's Voting Law Enforcement Officer of the Year Award to Sergeant Mitch Darby. Major Zecchinelli is going to present.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this award today. Sergeant Mitch Darby has been an enforcement agent for nearly 20 years. When it comes to boating safety enforcement, education, boating incident investigations, and boating safety outreach, Sergeant Darby stands alone in his assigned region in Iberia Parish. He has always represented LWF throughout his career with pride and has constantly exhibited a hard work ethic. From his uniforms to his equipment to how he approaches every aspect of his job, it stands out the moment you need him. His dedication to boating safety is evident in several ways. He received the Department Life Saving Award when a member of the public went missing in a vessel in the middle of winter. Because of his area knowledge and skills as an airboat operator, he and his coworkers quickly located the missing operator, preventing what could have been a tragedy due to low temperatures. In August of 2016, his skills as an airboat operator again came into play when Sergeant Darby was quickly tasked to assist in SAR operations for the catastrophic floods in Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas. When LWF was unable to respond in several areas with our traditional search and rescue vessels, Sergeant Darby, being one of our airboat operators, responded with an airboat and rescued numerous families and pets from their flooded homes. And this is only one of several natural disasters he's worked as a SAR responder. It's included Katrina, Rita, Ike, Isaac, and Gustav. In his 20-year career, Sergeant Darby has attained several credentials that make him an exemplary boating safety professional. He is the Advanced Accident Investigation Reconstruction Agent for his region. He has conducted numerous fatal accident investigations, and he is sought out by his peers for his knowledge when complex accident investigations occur. Because of this skill, he has not only assisted our agency with SAR missions, but he's also assisted local and parish agencies. He's taught numerous cadets and his fellow agents in his distinguished 20-year career. And by doing so, he makes our agency one of the most professional agencies in the country. Because of these many accomplishments mentioned here, and many that I'm constrained by time to talk about, it is my great honor to present Sergeant Mitch Darby with the NASBLA 2019 Boating Law Enforcement Officer of the Year Award.
Thank you very much, Major Darby, for what you have done over your career. I had no idea, but I know that it is very challenging to deal with accidents like that. And having done it for so many years, and people seeking you out for your advice and all, it says something about who you are. Thank you very much for your service. Moving on to the enforcement report, Major Skinner. Oh, we're gonna. You look different today.
I can actually see over the podium.
Oh.
As you can see, Major Skin is not here. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Chatty.
I'll be giving you enforcement report. Yeah, I'm gonna not live that one down. So for the month of December, enforcement agents issued 1,422 citations, 416 written warnings, and 23 public assists. We had 6 boating incidents in December. 2 of those resulted in injuries. No fatalities for the month of December. In your package, you will find a few news releases, and I'll give you a brief summary of those. A Prairieville man was arrested and a juvenile was cited in Concordia Parish for hunting deer during illegal hours, possession of illegally taken deer, hunting deer from a public road, discharging a firearm from a public road, hunting deer using illegal methods, hunting from a moving vehicle, and driving on levees. The juvenile was also cited for hunting without a resident big game license and failing to comply with deer tagging requirements. An agent observed the subject shining a spotlight on Highway 565 near Monterey. The subject then drove on the top of Black River Levee and continued to shine both sides of the levee. The agents observed that the subject stopped and shot an antlered deer from the vehicle on top of the levee. The juvenile was released to his parents after citations were issued. The subjects faced civil restitutions totaling $1,624 for the replacement value of the illegally taken deer. Enforcement agents cited an oyster fisherman in Calcasieu Parish for taking oysters from a polluted area, violating the sanitary code and failing to display proper numbers on the vessel. Agents responded to complaints of illegal oyster harvesting in Lower Calcasieu Parish using aerial surveillance from a drone and observed and recorded the subject illegally harvesting oysters in polluted waters. The vessel also did not display required numbers visible by air and did not have a human waste receptacle. Agents seized 10 sacks of oysters and returned them to the water. The vessel was seized on department seizure order. A Desarmes resident was cited in St. Charles Parish for taking over the daily bag limit of deer, failing to comply with deer tagging requirements, failing to change ownership of a boat registration, and an expired boat registration certificate. Agents were on patrol near 80 Arpent Canal in Hornville when they found the subject in possession of 2 untagged antlered deer. The subject admitted to harvesting both deer during his evening hunt. Agents also found that the subject failed to change ownership of the vessel he was operating, which also displayed an expired registration certificate. Agents seized both deer and donated them to a local charity. The subject also faced a civil restitution totaling $3,249 for the replacement value of the illegally taken deer. And that concludes the enforcement report, pending any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Any questions from the commission? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 10, to consider notice of intent for language of clarification on extending season options and extended squirrel season on Tier 1 participation in the Deer Management Assistance Program. Mr. Jonathan Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Today, I'm going to go over an amendment to the current language for the Tier 1 DMAP. DMAP simply an acronym for the Deer Management Assistance Program. Tier 1 in particular, we have about 174 active participants at this time in this program. And what we're proposing to do today is basically to change language that'll match how it's basically being administered already. So the old language that you can see with the strike through basically said that the extension, which is 15 days either before or after, should not exceed a total of 30. We're going to actually strike that because participants in this particular program, while they do get a season extension before or after, they do not get both. That's how it's been administered since the inception of this program. And the language change will simply just put the NOI in line with how it's administered. So the way it'll read now is they'll have 15 days prior to or after the established season framework for the regular deer area season. We're simply going to strike the not to exceed a total of 30 days. So they're not really going to lose any opportunity here. We're just going to change some language to make it line up with how it's working today. And the other thing that we're going to add, additionally, in addition to the 15 additional deer days that hunters get participating in Tier 1 DMAP, they also can request an extension to hunt rabbits for 10 additional days. And we've actually had some participants in the program ask, could squirrels be included in that? That was discussed at a staff meeting with our staff from across the state. Everyone was okay with it. It's going to provide some additional opportunity. So now it'll read, additionally, the department may grant extensions to hunt rabbits and squirrels by any legal means for up to 10 days after the established rabbit and squirrel season framework. And again, that is just going to be for participants in Tier 1 DMAP. And those are the two changes that we have for you to consider today. Any questions by anyone?
Hearing no questions, thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jim. When appropriate, I'd like to move David.
Sure. Commissioner Corville, I'll make a motion to approve the notice of intent.
I'll second the motion, Mr. Chairman, but I just have a question.
Second by Commissioner McPherson. And you have something you'd like to say on it, Commissioner McPherson?
I remember when the program was instituted, and I think it's been very successful. You know, I think it solved a lot of problems with clubs that found themselves on the boundary line, you know, between different areas. Some when I used to belong to a road in the lease split the two management areas. And this takes care of that problem. And it also takes care of problems where we have a later rut in some areas that we might even be looking at whether we should change the time frame in. But before we change this, I remember that the reason this language is in here, originally the intent was to give 30 days, 15 before, 15 after. And I hope it was none of my current colleagues, but somebody objected to that at the time. And so it was 15 days before, 15 days after. And this 30-day language was just inadvertently left in the rule.
Yes, sir.
But the question I have, has any club expressed an interest in it or expressed a reason why they should have 15 days before and 15 days after before we make this change?
No one has. As you expect, most of the participants in this program are in late breeding areas. And with that, they experience the beginning of at least their rut occurs in January. So with these additional days, they're applied to the end. It gives them that extension during a window at which they would like to hunt, which is late season. We do have a few participants in some of the coastal parishes that take advantage of it on the front end. But those folks, as you would expect, their rut, as you mentioned, occurs on the very front of the season. So they have some October breeding going on. So this actually gives them a few days in advance of breeding to actually hunt. So those are the two groups that are enrolled currently in the program. We just don't have very many, if any, folks in Deer Area 2 or some of the other deer areas where their rut may fall in November, December. It seems like our participants, as you would expect, are either in the late breeding area or the extremely early breeding area. And as such, they take advantage at the appropriate time, either before or after.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't
Yes, sir.
going in a wrong direction if
Sure.
there was some reason. But this has been a great program. It makes a lot of sense. And if anything, I think you would agree with the statement that on these Tier 1 clubs, if anything, the deer are being unharvested from what they should be killing on their clubs. And this
Sure.
just gives them a longer period of time to be able to successfully harvest the animals that are available.
You're
to them.
correct. It's a quota approach because both antlered and antlerless tags are administered. And I actually look back through time, and the harvest rate on Tier 1, they're actually harvesting fewer bucks than they are in Tier 2 when you look at an acreage to deer harvest. So they're, even with the extended season, they're just being extremely selective. So they're taking advantage of the wider window, but not necessarily harvesting more deer as a result.
I got one other question, and you may want to defer this to Mr. Tuma when he gets up on his NOI on seasons and bag limits. But in a Tier 1 club where you issued the buck and the doe tags and you report both on the form, do you have to get the other deer tags if you're only hunting on that club? Do you know the answer to that?
That would be a question for our enforcement section. Colonel, the question is, in Tier 1 DMAP, both antlered and antlerless tags are issued to participants. So hunters hunting in a Tier 1 DMAP club are going to possess department-issued tags for both antlered and antlerless deer. The question by Commissioner McPherson is whether or not those hunters would still need to purchase or at least possess LWF license tags.
I would imagine you would have to, because in statute, you're required to have the tags in your possession. Obviously, you're going to tag them with those DMAP tags, but I would imagine if they don't cost anything, I would imagine it would be in your best interest to have those tags with you while you're hunting.
Let's research that and in this process, if you think that's the correct answer, because I see no reason for it.
Right.
You don't report the deer that you kill.
That's right.
It's reported after the fact when you turn in your DMAP tag. So unless you've got some reason from an enforcement standpoint, I see no reason for Tier 1. And I'm delighted, but I'm shocked to hear that we've got that much participation in Tier 1. So, I'm all about being customer friendly, and if there's no reason to go stand in line and have them print out this much paper at Academy, why do it?
That's right.
Thank you, Commissioner Pearson.
Thank you very much, Commissioner McPherson. Hearing nothing else, with that, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to agenda item number 11, to consider notice of intent for Queen Bess Island Refuge rules and regulations. Mr. Tuma.
Thank you, Commissioner Sammy. Happy New Year to the commission. Sincerely, Miss Susan is correcting me already, which isn't strange by any means, but today I'm standing before you to present the Queen Bess Island Rules and Regulations Notice of Intent. As you remember, in November, you approved a resolution to incorporate Queen Bess Island as a refuge into our refuge system. As such, we will now go through the process of promulgating or proposing and promulgating some rules for Queen Bess. As a reminder, Queen Bess is an important colonial waterbird colony, and these rules that we are proposing kind of address some of the concerns that we would have with these activities, that the concerns that we have that these activities may propose on the success of how the nesting goes for these water birds. So they're pretty straightforward. Hunting being prohibited, access prohibited February 1st through September 30th, no disturbance or removal of vegetation or natural debris from the island, no fishing between the breakwaters from February 1st to September 30th, vehicles prohibited, and no nighttime activities. And with that, I'll take any questions that the commission may have.
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to go ahead and support the NOI.
So move.
Motion by Commissioner Samini, seconded by Commissioner Guidry. Hearing nothing else, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimously supported. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And don't go anywhere. Commissioner Samini wouldn't be happy.
Yeah.
Item number 12, to conduct a notice of intent for rule changes in wild quadrupeds and wild bird rules and regulations, including such and so on. Mr. Tillman.
Thank you, Commissioner Sunseri. Before I get started with my presentation, I want to thank the department personnel for assisting in this. As you know, I stand before you every January for 5 months and talk about the hunting season and WMA rules and regulations. This is truly a department-wide effort. We meet with enforcement. We work with fisheries on some regulations. I worked with OMF on some other stuff dealing with this. It's a department-wide effort. They are the ones who deserve all the thanks. I just have the responsibility to present it to you. So I just wanted to let y'all know that although you see me, it is truly a department-wide effort that's year-long. We're already working on what I hopefully will present to you if I'm still employed next January, if I can get the commissioners, the chairmanship right. So with that, we're going to cover resident game hunting season, the general wildlife management area hunting rules and regulations, the general and turkey hunting rules and regulations, and the migratory bird season regulations and bag limits. So I will remind you that what we're proposing today, or what we're going to cover, is changes to the notice of intent. Within the notice of intent, you'll see there's a lot of generic language. So we're only going to propose the changes. However, the migratory bird season regulation bag limits, those will actually be dates since we set them annually year to year. And since we work with, it's a migratory bird, and we work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we do not have generic language set up for those seasons. So we'll start with the general and wildlife management area hunting rules and regs. Language adjustment related to private lands within WMAs. There has been in some instances where we have some properties that are encapsulated within the WMA to where some landowners say, and we're not really entirely within the WMA because we either have a road or a water body in, adjacent to our property, even though the water body or the road may be part of the WMA. So we're just cleaning up some language from an enforcement standpoint, or so those landowners will know. A proposal to prohibit use and deposition of toxic shot associated with shotgun use on shooting ranges. So we will basically, for shotgun use, you'll be required to use non-toxic shot, as lead is, fatal to all indigenous wildlife. Addition of electric bicycle for methods allowed for game retrieval on WMAs. Last year, we proposed, or we accepted electric bicycle as a vehicle that you can use on WMAs. This just points out that you can use them to retrieve game on WMAs, with the exception of those that are listed. Defining where an electric bicycle can be operated. There's currently no regulation in place where electric bicycles can be operated, so this will restrict them to ATV trails on WMAs. Although the language says electric bicycles are restricted to designated roads and UTV trails, since bicycles you can technically use on the road, so they have a total different set of rules than ATVs. You can ride your bicycle down the street without breaking any laws. So technically you can take an electric bicycle down a designated road if you choose, but they will be restricted to ATV and UTV trails if you plan to use them off those designated roads. Clarification on allowable weapons that are legal during the February hog dog season on WMAs. This is just cleaning up some language, as all pistols are handguns, but not all handguns are pistols, so it's more or less semantics. So we're just going to strike through pistols and replace that with handguns. And I can go through the history of the word pistol if you'd like me to, but you probably don't. Addition of class 1 and 3 PCHP permittees to utilize the PCHP stands on Alexander State Forest. Currently, we only allow wheelchair bound by allowing I think we're going to allow class 3 and class 4 permittees now. That's class 3 is an amputee of the upper extremity, and class 4 is someone who's visually impaired. So we'll allow those people to utilize those PCHP blinds on Alexander State Forest. Shifting of 2 primitive modern firearm, either 6 days to 2 modern firearm bucks only days on Alexander State Forest. So we're going to change just basically the weapon that's allowed to use for this. And you can see, I should have clarified earlier, I know it's a very busy slide with all the colors, but the colors are what we're changing, so it's easier for you to follow. So you see on number C, the primitive firearm was the first Saturday of November for 2 days. If you go up to firearms, you see it's now modern firearms, and that's just, it's going to allow additional opportunity for people who wish to modern firearm hunt instead of primitive firearm hunt. Bayou Mason, just moving the modern either sex firearm hunt to traditional Thanksgiving weekend and making the hunt 3 days instead of 2. That hunt took place the Saturday and Sunday prior to Thanksgiving previously. Big Lake, reduction in the amount of turkey hunting days from 16 to 9 due to concerns about habitat and declining turkey numbers. We've had a lot of rainfall in the spring the last 3 years, and we're taking it on the chin pretty hard with turkey population statewide. So this is, we're trying to get out in front of that and shorten the season. Same thing, same exact regulation with BEF. So we'll move on from there. Bussy break, this is new. Establishing general and fishing regulations for Bussy break WMA. It's a very busy slide. I hope you've had a chance to look over it, but Bussy break is currently closed. So when it is opened, these regulations would apply. So it's basically things that you can do on Bussey, what you can utilize on the trails, and then there's some daily limits for black bass, crappie, and brim, and it's also some size limits for black bass and crappie. Floyd McElroy changed when the BOW become an outdoors women hunt day. It used to be any weekend after the lottery hunts. Now it's going to be the first weekend in December. And we chose that date to where it will be the same every year so they can schedule their activities a little bit better. They have a lot of stuff going on in January, so it's just where they can nail that weekend down for their schedule. Changing the deer limit for all hunts on Floyd McElroy. It was 2 per day. So now we're going to change that to 1 deer per participant per weekend for all hunts. We only have youth lottery, some wheelchair physically challenged hunts, and the BOW hunt on Floyd McElroy. For those of you who do not know, Floyd McElroy is 700 acres. It's basically an island, a habitat in the sea of agriculture with so we have a wintering population, and we've had good success in the past. However, we planted that in 2001, so it's starting to shade out, reduce habitat, and then we've changed from corn and soybeans in the surrounding area to cotton a little bit. So there's a little bit of effect on carrying capacity. So we're proposing this change. Fort Polk, Vernon, WMA, designation of an archery only area on Fort Polk. It's just simply due to confusion what the cantonment area actually was. I'm confused of how that's cantonment instead of whatever it should be. But we met with the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Army, and their Ecological Service Branch and their Environmental Branch, and Kisatchie folks, and nobody could relay what the cantonment area is. So we're just going to designate an archery-only area on the map to eliminate confusion from personnel that work for the U.S. Army, Kisatchie, ourselves, and the public. Grassy Lake WMA, closing the turkey season due to intense and extended periods of flooding resulting in declining populations. Self-explanatory with the historic Mississippi River flood this year, and we've had declining populations there for several years, so we're going to close the season there. Reduction of Sonny Gilbert WMA, the same change from 16 to 9 that we talked about on Big Lake and Beth WMAs for turkey season, and then we're going to remove the turkey lottery and make it an open hunt. So instead of limiting the amount of participants that we have for the youth hunts, we're just going to allow whoever to bring their youth to hunt that weekend. Little River WMA, addition of crawfishing as an allowable activity. We're just allowing some additional opportunity. Pearl River WMA, proposal to close hunting, all hunting except waterfowl south of Highway 90 when the gauge is 16.5. When the gauge reaches 16.5 on Pearl River, pretty much all of that area is underwater, and it pushes the wildlife on the old Highway 11 berm. What we have is a lot of activity there, and it's a lot of wildlife disturbance, so we're proposing this regulation to kind of offset that disturbance that's caused with people driving up and down Highway 11 or hunting right along Highway 11, displacing that wildlife on the only high ground that's on the WMA. Richard Yancey, closure of commercial and recreational fishing until 10. If you remember, we proposed the same regulation on Spring Bayou last year because there were some, some conflicts between teal hunters and fishermen. So we're just saying you're going to delay your fishing until after 10 p.m. during early teal season. Sabine WMA, removing the mandatory deer check due to insufficient kill or harvest to obtain meaningful data. We've may kill 10 or 11 deer for that 2 days, and that's not a lot. That's not enough data to gather to staff that hunt. Opening of the entire area on Sandy Hollow to youth PC hunt. It was previously allowed on North Track because of fields, or not allowed, or only allowed on because of field trials, but we haven't had a field trial on Sandy Hollow in several years, so we feel like this regulation is no longer valid. Tunica Hills Youth Lottery, we're adding a day, so now it'll be the weekend before statewide season, so that's going to be another day of additional opportunity for those youth. All right, now we will move to the general and WMA turkey hunting regulations. So we've got 3 things we're going to do. We're going to move Webster and Bossier parishes from Turkey Area B to Turkey Area A. This will result in an increase of 7 days of turkey hunting opportunity for these parishes. Moving parts of Iberville and Ascension Parish from Turkey Area B to Turkey Area C will result in a decrease of 7 days in these designated parts. And then closing turkey season in portion of Rapides Parish located east of the Red River and south of 28 to the parish line. There's a pretty big landowner has a pretty big tract of land that we're thinking about potential restocking. So we're going to close that little piece for turkey hunting if we're going to go through the effort to restock. And now we'll move to the migratory bird seasons. Woodcock, same. It's always the last. It's January 31st, and you go forward 45 days. So these dates are always, we propose them the same, December 18th to the January 31st. The bag limit and the possession limit's the same. Mourning dove, you see those dates there. I don't know if you want me to go over them, but it's just basically calendar shifts. Teal, early teal season dates, September 12th through the 27th. The bag limit and possession limit stays the same. Clinging and clapper rails, just basically calendar adjustments, the same thing we did from last year. Soar and Virginia rails, same thing. Gallinules, the same dates. Snipe, you see the dates there. We're basically following calendar adjustments again with the zones that we're going to propose. And then ducks, coots, and mergansers. Coastal zone, November 7th. Well, let me start by saying this. This is the first year that we're going to have the opportunity to have the veterans only hunt outside the normal season framework. So you see, Larry has proposed these dates. The coastal zones, the 7th and 8th would be the youth, and then January 30th and 31st would be the veterans hunt. And then we're going to start the first split on November the 14th and the second split on December the 19th. The west zone, a little bit different. We're going to have a youth and a veterans day on the beginning and end of the season, so that Saturday would be the youth, the Sunday would be the veterans only, and then the Saturday at the end of the season would be youth only, and the Sunday would be veterans only. And it would be the same opening and closing as the coastal zone. East zone, we have just kind of like the west zone, we have a youth and veterans on the front end and a youth and veterans on the end. And we have November 21st would be the first split open, and December 19th would be the second split open. And all the daily bag limits are the same, except you see only one Scott may be taken the first 15 days of the season, and then 2 allowed per day for the remainder of the season. And this second split, or the second slide, it shows what I just went over about the Scott being taken, 1 Scott for the first 15 days and 2 per day for the remainder. Light geese, north zone, November 7th and December 6th, and December 19th through, oh, I'm sorry.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting a lot of calls from the duck hunters in southeast Louisiana that want the season to open up later for ducks. The teal season, like maybe back the whole thing up because the temperatures and everything, the way it's been, seems like they're not getting the birds till late in the season. The season's closed and then the birds show up. That's what they tell them.
Yes, sir.
What's the department's feeling on that as far as that possibility, or is that what's going on with it?
You want to add? Well, it's as far as generally what we try to get it is the last split as far in the framework as we can. And Larry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Larry's always going to propose a season that's open during Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's holidays. Okay.
Right.
So we always, that first split is centered around the Thanksgiving holidays where people can hunt that. And then we go from as far as we can we can't have a season past January 31st in January for any of the zones. So what we, yes, sir. So if what we do, we generally do to take advantage of the most weekends that we hunt, that last day is probably going to be the last Sunday of January. And then we back up to where we get the Christmas holidays and we can still get the Thanksgiving holidays. Is that correct, Larry? Okay. That's where we're as late as we can go right now, what we proposed.
Yeah, okay, so even if we wanted to, we can't go fast.
No, sir. January 31st is the drop dead date that you can hunt ducks in the Mississippi Flyway or for Louisiana.
All right, thank you. That's
Okay.
good enough.
All right. Okay, light geese, November 7th, north zone, November 7th, December 6th, and December 19th to January 31st, south zone 14th through the 6th, and December 19th to February 7th. We're going to change what we did last year. Last year we had, I think it was 88 and 2. We're going to go 74 and 3 is what we're proposing this year. So the daily limit would be 3 and the possession limit would be 9. So that's a change from what we did last year. Canada geese, it's going to be the same seasons that I just talked about with the same zones. On the white front, data limit is 1 and possession limit is 3. Light geese, conservation order, that's Snows, Blues, and Ross. North Zone, December 7th through the 18th, so that happens during the split, okay? So these conservation orders happen during the split, and then immediately after the close of the seasons. And there's no possession limit, there's no bag limit. Migratory bird season, so this is the extended falconry dates, and they're just, these dates fit. Larry proposes these dates, and they're just calendar adjustments basically around where the splits occurs and within the season framework. Dove hunting regulations, changing the legal dove hours on Elbow Slough to half hour before sunrise to noon on opening weekend. It was open until from sunrise to sunset. Now we're just going to have it from sunrise to 12 noon on the opening weekend of the first split. And that's all I have. And with that, I will entertain any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner McPherson?
Tommy, on the language for doves,
Yes, sir.
it seems like we're still the fully dressed Eurasian and collared doves. They're not included in your bag limit, and the language you use is fully dressed. And I'd like for that language to be considered changed to reflect what you're supposed to leave on a dove to identify it as one of those doves that's fully dressed. Because if I leave one tail feather or something, well, then I would meet that requirement, but it wouldn't be my requirement for the proper identification of those doves.
Yes, sir. That language is in Title 76, it's just not in that document because the document you have is just what we're changing. So it's not in this chart, but it is within Title 76.
But how will it appear when I'm a hunter reading it?
Well, it's also in the hunting pamphlet. This, for your sake, I'm just presenting this because it's the changes, but it is within the migratory bird season framework. It talks about prohibited activities and legal gear and methods of take. It's all in Title 76 and in our hunting pamphlet.
So JW will have to fix that.
He's got
Totally
it.
dressed.
Yes, sir.
Wake
Any
up,
other
JW.
questions from the commission? Sure. I mean, we'd like to make motion. I think we first.
So yeah, you could make a motion to accept the NOI as presented, or you could make a motion and then have a motion to accept the notice of amendment as not necessarily amended, as changed by the, I don't know what the technical term would be, Cole.
So this is an opportunity, you've got the department's recommendation in front of you right now. As Tommy mentioned, you can accept those and put that out as your notice. You can amend right now, and the amended version will be what you as your notice of consent. Put in the public comment, this is our decision, propagate through schools.
I have a proposed amendment to allow for a hunter to carry 5 shells instead of 3 shotgun shells for small game only, not to include migratory birds.
Okay.
We
So you're,
Wait, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second it. Here's some discussion.
Okay, so that's what, we have a motion by Commissioner Hogan, a second by Commissioner Corville. With that, discussion from the commission.
Yeah, won't you explain what your thought process is?
Commissioner Hogan, would you please kind of elaborate? Share with us how you got to that point?
Well, there is a retired biologist who's been bugging me about this for 3 or 4 years. And our bordering states allow a squirrel hunter to carry 5 shells in their shotgun instead of 3. And his point is you shoot at 2 squirrels, knock down 2 squirrels, and both of them are still alive. You need some more shells to kill those squirrels.
You stand on them.
So small game only, not to include migratory birds.
Actually, what was referring to in page 28, section C, language where it restricts the shotguns larger than 10 gauge or capable of holding more than 3 shells shall be prohibited. I think the proposal, what I'm hearing, is to change that to 5, shall be prohibited.
That's correct.
And then I would, just to interject, although everybody probably knows and I'm just being stupid, but it would apply also to turkeys and quail if you're saying resident game. Well, deer's a quadruped, so they're covered under, there's already a gear restriction that's placed. However, for turkeys, quail, rabbits, and squirrels, that regulation that Mr. Myers pointed out, that's what's relevant for them, okay?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Corville?
could we get kind of, I know we put the enforcement kind of on the spot here, but I'd like to see, I mean, you can see a situation where, yeah, I'm hunting for squirrels, but I'm also in the middle of fall. And you got those kinds of things. Do you guys have any concerns about, as it relates to enforcement and that sort of thing? Do we have concerns about the enforcement of trying to differentiate? Well, I was cruising through this WMA. I mean, does this apply to WMAs at all?
Yes, sir, it would be legal statewide.
So
Yes, sir.
I can be moseying around Sherburne, minding my own business, pursuing squirrels, but then maybe duck season's open too, and I stumble through a swamp, and I mean, do we have? It's got the potential of an enforcement challenge, wouldn't it be?
I guess the question is, you
I
want
don't
lead
see
or
it being
steel?
different with-
Well, on the
Three to
WMA,
five.
it's got to be with steel.
Oh, that's good.
Sir, there is no shot restriction on WMAs, no.
I
So
can shoot lead shot at squirrels
on WMAs, yes, sir, you can.
Okay.
You'd be in the middle of a.
On
duck
refuges, on federal refuges, you cannot, but on WMAs, you can.
Okay.
So you could say you're in the middle of the duck pond hunting squirrel.
I'll share
Good
my
luck.
thoughts with Commissioner Hogan while I second it.
Yes, sir.
For discussion, I'm not convinced I support it. So, that's where I'm at.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any more discussion? No, seeing no discussion left. All in favor?
Let me,
Commissioner Pearson?
I follow Chad's logic, and if you're in a WMA, if you're somewhere else, and you're squirrel hunting on the creek bank, and the wood ducks jump up, and I guess it would go back to, do you have lead shot in your thing or steel shot? As to what enforcement would do, but I don't see. It looks to me like it poses a problem.
I mean, you can't possess lead shot or have an unclubbed weapon while you hunt migratory birds anyway. So if we catch them with the unplugged gun and with lead shot, and they shoot waterfowl, we're going to write them a ticket.
If you happen to be there at that moment where they're hunting it, but I think Chad's concern is your agent catches somebody coming out of the woods, and they got their ducks, but they say, no, I took my plug out. I mean, in the very infrequent case that you'd be checked, you'd say, no, I took my plug out because I was squirrel hunting on the way out from the duck blind.
Of course, he's coming out with a duck, and he's going to have to put his plug back in. He's going to have to throw all his lead shot away, because even possession of lead shot while hunting waterfowl, he's in violation.
He could have squirrel.
I was no longer hunting waterfowl, I was hunting squirrels.
Doesn't make any difference. Possession of lead shot while you have waterfowl in your possession in the field is illegal.
Commissioner Smith?
You could have 5 shells of steel shot and say you're hunting squirrels and you're really hunting ducks.
Yeah,
It doesn't
that'd
matter
be
whether it's
the
lead or
only
steel.
time if you would have steel shot and unplug, we'd have to catch him exactly, shooting more than 3 times, But if we catch him without plug.
What we're saying is it just looks like it would make it harder to make good cases if they're going to use that argument of why they had 5 shells in their guns or had the capacity for 5 shells.
Commissioner Corville?
I'm ready to vote, but in case anybody's wondering where I'm going to probably vote no without hearing some additional support, which we can always bring it back another time. But maybe that guy
start shooting them with a 22 and move on. But
I'm ready to vote whenever y'all are. Okay, any more discussion here? None, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Opposed?
No.
The nays have it, the motion fails.
I did my job.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hogan. And, I appreciate that you try to help the constituent, and especially biologists. Those biologists just give us so much trouble.
I just want to know where you found 5 quail to shoot.
But nonetheless,
So that was a vote on the amendment.
just vote on the
Okay.
amendment. Now we're going to go ahead and, since we had no more questions and no more amendments, we're going to go back to the original consideration on the NOI and entertain a motion to accept the NOA as
Mr. Chairman.
as written. Commissioner McPherson?
Did I read, I didn't hear you go over it, but did I read somewhere about a change where you've got to use steel shot at ranges?
Yes, sir. We covered it.
We did.
It was
You were so fast, my little mind don't keep up
I
with that.
had a bet with Kenny that I could finish within 17 minutes, and I made it in 16 minutes and 51 seconds.
That's because I didn't answer
So,
the question. I didn't
but-
interrupt
but
you with questions.
Maybe I've lost now since I've been up here 27 minutes and 8 seconds.
So my question, since you got leftover time, is where do we buy this 7.5 steel shot? I don't see it at Academy or an 8 shot.
It's available. We did I think Jeff Duguay did a little cursory call and found that non-toxic alternatives were available.
Where and at what price?
It's actually, I teal hunt with 6 shot, and it's the same cost as lead shot. Actually, lead shot's kind of getting so rare that for squirrel hunting and stuff, it's actually more expensive.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what it is for 6 and 4s and all, but I just don't see, I see them cases of 7.5 and 8 lead, and I just don't see it. And it's extremely reasonable to shoot skeet and trap with. It's $4 a box.
Yes, sir. Well, we just feel it's our responsibility as a wildlife agency, taking care of the environment and the wildlife resources, that lead is proven toxic to every living creature on Earth. So we feel it's our duty, since shooting ranges, they basically concentrate the deposition of lead. Although we do the lead abatement, it's still out there in the environment. So we just feel it's our obligation to propose this at this time.
Hearing no more questions, we're going to go to
Mr. Chairman, let me, I'm just going to ask you for documentation on the availability and the cost of steel shot, because there's a major cost to the department, because the department buys a big portion of that shot that's shot on those ranges. Am I not correct?
Yes, sir. And we have that data available, and we can get that. We can provide
That's all I would
the
ask.
commission. We can provide that data to you.
I don't want somebody raising heck that we did that to them and they got ready to go shoot and were turned away and had to leave because they didn't have it. They said, well, I can't buy any of that.
Keep in mind, this regulation would go into effect next January 1. So there's a year to, it's going to go through the public comment process, but you'll have a year to know. And then as you requested for the doe urine, we can always, I guess, if Secretary Myers or Assistant Secretary Myers agrees, we can reach out to vendors and say, hey, this is what we're going to start doing on our range. You may want to start carrying non-toxic alternatives in
Brian's
7 and
the
8
one that
shot.
wanted me to ask questions because he's got a budget for it.
I didn't want to, I can't share with you in an open public forum what Brian told me to answer every question of the commission before I got up here. So.
Thank you very much. With that, we're going to go ahead to voting on the original notice of intent as written. I'd entertain the motion. Motion by Commissioner Samney, second by Commissioner Smitko. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Unanimously supported.
So following up on that, public comment will be accepted through 9 p.m. March 2nd, 2020, and that public comment will be accepted at these Wildlife Fisheries Commission meetings monthly, or you can call, email, or write a letter to me, and there's all my information on the screens. Separate from that, we will have 6 public meetings, and there are the meeting times and locations throughout the state. And then I will be providing public comment, however often y'all would like for me to provide the public comment from the commission. I know 2 years ago it was every week. Last year it was every month. So however often you would like me to summarize the public comment and share with you, that way you're not bombarded with it at the end of the month, we can do that. Yes, ma'am.
Add a public hearing down in the Bayou region, the first term.
We certainly can if that's your request.
I'd like
Okay.
Thank you, Tommy. I'd appreciate if we get this on the website, notify people of the passage of this proposed NOI and all the public hearings following the meeting, so that people can be made aware quickly as to when they'll be able to have their opportunity for input.
We have the press release already finished. We will post the entire notice of intent. We'll post this public hearing date, and we'll also post the document that I provided y'all that has the actual dates where the public doesn't have to figure out the generic language. So we have all that available that we're going to post as the news releases at the conclusion of this meeting.
That's great. You get more information for people, gives them, can answer all their questions prior to, and I really appreciate the work the department's done. It's always challenging. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson?
I just noticed that the hearing in it's in Pineville is at the Alexander Forester Center. Were we successful in moving the district office to the Forester Center?
I think we have a meeting this afternoon with Constatue personnel, so we're well on our way. We're about 75% there, but we're working through some different federal language and state language, but we're almost there. And
Is that going to be a temporary or a permanent move?
I will allow Assistant Secretary Myers to elaborate on that.
Certainly at the time, it's going to be a short time. I can't recall the terms of the lease as far as the years, but it is a short-term plan. With I guess the idea that we'll be trying to move forward with getting funding to build a new facility.
Thank you. Moving on.
Can I say one more thing?
No,
I'm already at 33.
sorry.
I'm going for
You've gone
35.
Way over time.
I just wanted to, Commissioner Samony, I want to say I enjoyed your time on the commission. I enjoyed your time as chair. It was fun to talk to you. And I really appreciated the way that you engaged the staff and asked questions instead of just telling us this is what I want you to do. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And then Commissioner Sunseri, I've enjoyed your time with the commission. It was always, the meetings were enjoyable. Sorry for my incompetence, but I think Commissioner Hogan will have to deal with that from now on, at least the next year. So thank y'all. Thank y'all for allowing us to present this today.
Thank you.
And then I forgot.
Thanks for the levity.
Yeah, I forgot. Miss Susan's got me on the time, but I'm supposed to thank her for all her help that she's provided through this Title 76 and the revisions and notice of intent process. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I would also like to make mention that our partners also play a big role in this. Fish and Wildlife Service, I mean, we meet with those guys, we meet with the staff, and so the Corps of Engineers. So it's a big, like Tommy mentioned earlier, this is a very big process to get to this point. A lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth, all for the betterment and employment so that we can have the hunting season that we can have.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Meyer. The department does a heck of a job. This is a challenging thing, and trying to make everyone happy on this is tough. So thank you very much for your hard work. Moving on to item 13, a receiver report on the spotted sea trout management options. Mr. Adrians.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, if you recall, back in September, we presented the spotted sea trout assessment, and we'll let you know that we'd come back at some point with some management options or scenarios to review. So that's what we have for you today. And I'm going to start by going through the projections of those stock metrics that we put together, spawning stock biomass, spawning potential ratio, and fishing mortality. Now, the thing to remember with these is these projections are based on the base model of the assessment. So that assessment we presented to you, and the time frame begins 2020 and goes out through 2029. So if in the future there are any regulations, those projections will shift by whatever time it takes to get those regulations in place. So with this summary, there's some assumptions as well as the fact that it's based on the base model of the assessment. We're also making the assumption that future recruitment levels are going to be as they were in the last decade. That's what we modeled in this. And future winter severity, that it is also going to be around the mean of the last decade. And each management scenario that you'll see represents a specific savings to the stock. And that saving is in female yield that's landed. And we did that from 5% up to 30% in 5% increments. Now, for the sake of not making the graphs too busy in the next few slides, you'll see we put the 10, 20, and 30 in there, but the document you have shows those percentage increments in a table.
Mr. Chairman, quick question. Thank you. Mr. Adrian, the female yield that you're referencing, is there a certain size class or year class that you are looking at in female yield, or is it?
It's overall yield.
Overall yield. It could be a year 5 class fish or a two-week old.
It's of the landings. These projections project 20% of overall
legal
landings.
fish, which would be a 12-inch fish, if you're looking only at landing.
Correct. It's of landed fish.
Okay.
So if you look here, these are the fishing mortality projections, and you can see they go out, as I mentioned, through 2029. And with this graphic, the thing to remember is the limit is above the target line for fishing mortality when you're looking at these graphs. The next few, that'll be switched just so we don't confuse the issue when we move on. But so you can see here, it's pretty much all the scenarios except the 5% yield reduction will rebuild that stock. It's just a matter of when and what year it rebuilds that stock. And so the same thing with spawning stock biomass. You can see that 10, 20, and 30% line drawn out in reference to that limit and target line. And with this, to give you an idea, that 10% reduction would recover the stock by 2029, the 15% reduction by 2026, the 20% reduction by 2023, and the 30% by 2022, realizing that would shift given when and if any rules are put in place.
Question. What has happened? What's going on? Do I have any idea?
So we, as you saw when we presented that assessment, we've got several things going on. That the age classes have truncated. We've had higher fishing effort, and then we've had some natural events, some freezes that while it's not, there's not one particular thing. All these things are combining to drive that stock biomass down. So this is spawning stock biomass, and you can see there that those recovery lines. And then with spawning potential ratio, here are those estimates, and you can see it's that 10% line is the first one that comes over the limit but doesn't go over the target there. The 20% does, and 30% even further. So now that we've covered that, we've run some scenarios with various savings, and we'll present those. And we've done those just looking at the creel limit alone, the size limit alone, and then a combination of size and creel, including some scenarios for a slot limit instead of just a simple minimum length limit. And so we'll go through those. Before I get to that, I'm going to give you some of the information on those things. We used our recreational creel and our biological data from 2016 through 2018 to feed into these projections. And as I mentioned earlier, these savings are in terms of the female landings and weight. So those reductions will be in those terms. The savings we've analyzed are from creel and size limit changes only. The creel limit savings are based on future directed effort, obviously remaining comparable to what it is now. And with the size limit savings, we ran two scenarios that you'll see. We've got a 10% discard mortality, which is the one that's built into the assessment, and we'll show those lines. And then we kind of took a worst case 25% discard mortality. If those studies for some reason are wrong, or fishermen are just beating their catch on the boat, whatever it may be, we wanted to put in a worst case to show you kind of another metric that this is what the assessment uses, but here's if we're wrong, here's what it could be, just to bracket those savings.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Adrian, can you help me understand the 2016 to 2018, the rationale behind that? Would there be any benefit in going a longer data set, or we believe 16 to 18 is the most recent landings trends and effort trends? Is that
that's our it's the most recent data, so we wanted to use what we're seeing right now.
Okay.
Obviously, if you put any rules in place, you're going to be shifting what's occurring. Anglers will change what's going on.
Have you seen angler trends? I mean, we've seen that effort going up.
If you remember that graph we presented, we've had that steady,
still a little shady on that one,
increase in
okay. Thanks.
So I wanted to cover, before we get into some of those savings, I wanted to cover angler trip harvest frequency. So this is number of spotted sea trout landed per angler trip, and the frequency of that. So you can see most fishermen of the state are like me. They're horrible. 31% of anglers land one fish, 15% harvest two. And if you go out to 10 fish, it's 85% of those angler trips that harvest 10 fish or less. You can see there's a little spike up at the 25 limit.
Mr. Adrian, that's people that specifically fishing for trout?
These are
like people fishing redfish and catch trout.
These are trips that had trout land.
Okay, that's a lot.
All right. So if we look at a creel limit savings only, and this graphic is broken out by those areas east of the Mermentau, areas 1 through 6, and then west of the Mermentau, which is our coastal study area 7, which is the Calcasieu area, which has those different regulations. You can see if you took them separately, in Calcasieu, since it's already a 15 fish creel, to get above a 20% savings, you need a 5 fish creel. And elsewhere in the state, if you took the rest of the state to get to that 20% savings, it'd be about a 10 fish creel that you need if you're looking at just the creel limit change. So before we get into size limit projections, savings projections, there is a trade-off. If you're going to change the size limit, you're going to end up changing what's harvested and discarded. And this is that graphic starting with 12 inches and going up to 20. You can see that point where we currently are at 12 inches, we're harvesting about 57% of the trout that are landed and about 43% are discarded. As you move up 14 inches, for example, you'd be harvesting about 34% and discarding 66%. So there's a trade-off. I just wanted to make y'all aware of that. So if we look at minimum size limit savings, and if you recall, I mentioned the 10%, which is which is the discard mortality we use in the assessment. And we've also graphed that what we're calling a worst case, the 25% discard mortality. You can see if you use that 20% line, and you can see about a 14-inch, if you're looking at just minimum size limits, a 14-inch would get you that 20% reduction at the 10% discard mortality, and you'd have to go to a 15-inch if you're assuming a 25% to get to that, and that'd be about 25% savings.
How did, I mean, I can understand the high discard mortality and snap and stuff, but with trout, how do y'all get that percentage? Because to me, you know, when you unhook a little trout, you just have him right there and.
Yeah, the 10% is what we use in the assessment, as I mentioned, and that's the general average of Gulf wide, what a lot of the studies show, and a lot of the other Gulf states use that in their assessment. We just wanted to put another worst case in there for you to see that if for some reason all those studies are off or we're off,
Okay.
here's something to bracket those
But
projections.
you would think that, I mean, just fishing, I would think 25% is way.
It's it probably, and so that 10% is an average throughout the year.
Right.
In the summer, gut hook trout,
Yeah.
probably not going to make it. Yeah, hooked in the lip,
All right.
moved quickly, good chance.
Okay. All right.
So moving on, so before I show you the slot limits, this is that same size limit trade-off. But if you're using if you're looking at slot limits and you're doing, and what we look at in the graphic is a 14 to 20 inch slot. And we'll show some other graphics that's 12 to 20, 13 to 20. But if you did a 12 to 20 right now, where we are, you're at about 56% harvest, 44% discard. So it's a little better than just having the minimum size length limit. If you moved up to a 14 to 20 slot, it's about the same as just a 14-inch minimum length limit. You'd be at about 33% harvest and 67% discard. But the point is, like with the last slide that showed this, there's a trade-off. So if we looked at slot limits and reductions, and depending on where you would start that slot going up to 20 inches, you can see the savings there for both those discard mortality rates. And if we're using that 20% line as kind of a spot to look at, you see 21% for the 25%, the worst case, and 26% at what we use in the assessment, that 10%.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Corville?
Adrian, can you share with us why y'all chose the 20 inch? I mean, are we assuming that's a year 3 class fish, or is that a year 4 class fish?
That 20 inch above that, there's not too much harvest, but then that allows you to save some of those bigger females. That's a good point.
So what year would you assume a 20 inch-ish fish is?
It varies so much. And depending on the sex, you saw we have those
female
different growth rates.
We can get into that later. I guess where I'm going with that is I'm still hung up on the graphs you showed in past months, how we have good recruitment, but you're concerned about those older year class fish. And my former practicing biological brain says that doesn't add up. Because if we believe those are the higher percentage fish, and we're missing those, you shouldn't have this recruitment. So where in the hell is that recruitment coming from?
So that
just keep that in mind.
And those are important, and we want to rebuild that age structure.
How are we getting recruitment now?
Because that recruitment's so environmentally driven.
Right. Okay.
All right, so if we combine creel and minimum size limits, you can follow these lines at the various minimum size limit that's listed above that line, going from 12 up to 16. And you can see a 14-inch minimum there as an example. If you were using 20% savings as the bar, that 14-inch, just a 14-inch minimum still gets you out to a 25 bag and get you the 20% savings. And for 25% discard mortality, it's slightly different. I think that comes in at 18% at the end of that 14-inch minimum length at the 25 bag. To get just above 20%, you'd be at the 20 fish bag if you were assuming the worst case mortality. And so if we do the same thing for slot limits at that 10% discard mortality. You can see these lines, basically anything that's above 14, there's no bag limit change required. If you're using that 20% again as an example bar to shoot for the 13 and 12, obviously you need some adjustments to get back to the 20, back to 15 or 10 fish, depending on which length limit was selected. So this is at that worst case. You can see it's very similar. It's just shifted a little bit. So next steps. What we would recommend is to recover the stock to target or above by 2025, and at least a 20% savings. Now, we'll get into that a little more in the next few slides, but some recovery assumptions that, like we discussed, we mentioned recruitment briefly, that future recruitment is around that mean of the most recent recruitment in the last decade, so that we're not having any recruitment failures. Future winter severity, like we discussed, that it's similar to the last decade. Future directed effort is going to remain comparable to current or increasing at the same rate, not anything dramatically different than current. And discard mortality, we discussed that. We use a 10% in the base case of the assessment. If that's wrong for some reason, then these projections may not be accurate at that 10%. And so we threw that 25% in there just to bracket those projections for you. So options, once again, we mentioned the recovery of the stock by 2025. And there's lots of ways to get there. There's creel limit changes only. There's size limit changes only, including a slot limit, a combination of creel and size. There's an alternative, which we didn't project in here, but there's fisheries closures. And then there's supplemental action that can be taken in combination with these things. For example, special regulations following a significant freeze event. But that on its own would not recover the stock if that were the only option chosen. So with that, we're at a point where I'll take some questions, but I did want to mention, and I did already, our goal is to see recovery by 2025 with at least a 20% savings. However, we'd like some feedback from the commission. Is that a fast enough recovery? Is that a slow enough recovery? If you want to recover faster, there's going to be more pain to anglers. Recover slower, obviously longer time frame to get that stock up to where we'd like to see it. So it's a question of we'd like to know how comfortable the commission is with any changes and what changes y'all might be comfortable with. So if we do bring some regulations, we have that in mind. And I'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Jason. Any questions?
Commissioner, quick question, just, do you think the proliferation of people selling, live shrimp out on the water is having an impact? I mean, if you're fishing with plastic compared to fishing with live shrimp, you're gonna catch trout on live shrimp. And it seems like everybody now is buying live shrimp out on the water to go trout fishing. Is that having an impact, do you think?
I would imagine so. If you're fishing with live shrimp, as you mentioned, you have a better chance of that fish swallowing that hook or getting really deep hooked, and then you're on the further end of that discard mortality if it's undersized.
When you're catching more fish.
And you could be catching more fish, but if you recall that angler success graph there, folks still aren't catching a lot per trip. And it's like with anything. You got folks that are really successful and folks that aren't. And that's why that discard mortality.
I don't have a lot of confidence in that angler success graph. But, you know, if the fish are biting in my area, everybody's going to catch a limit. If they're not biting, you're not going to catch it. I mean, it's just one or the other. I mean, you'll have 4 people on a boat, everybody catches the limit, and then what they do is they start throwing back the dead little ones. 12 inch.
And that's what we see from those creel samples of those trips that landed trout. And you did see that spike at 25%, and that's likely occurring from those days where the bite's really on and folks are bringing in.
Yeah.
Everybody's bringing in a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Corville?
So in your supplemental page here, and I think I remember hearing you guys say in the summertime when you expect higher growth rate, a 12-inch fish that we believe is sexually mature enough to spawn, right?
Yeah, let me pull this up. Yes, so we've got maturity, you're looking at 8 to 10 inches, but that's 50%.
And we anticipate that those aren't our best
Sure.
producing fish. Still worry about
so right now with that age structure, that is the majority of our spawning stock. It's those smaller, first mature and getting towards the upper end, because if you remember our age structure, we're very few 3+ fish, not a whole lot of 2s, but a lot of 1s.
And that's why we are seeing high recruitment and potentially low biomass in those bigger fish. Is that what
Well,
assume?
obviously you got some smaller fish there, so your spawning stock biomass is lower. But that recruitment, we don't have a very direct relationship between that recruitment and the spawning stock biomass. It is so environmentally driven.
Right.
If you look at recruitment, we've averaged, there haven't been any trends that have been too dramatic, and we're still getting roughly that mean recruitment, but our spawning stock biomass has still been decreasing.
Even though you could have these small fish contributing to that biomass.
Yeah.
So when you determine recruitment, what size fish are you considering? And that's through your gillnet survey, right?
It's through the gillnet survey.
I mean,
It's
you're not considering, you're considering all of them?
that's the age 1, right? Yeah, that's the age 1.
Age 1, and that age 1 fish is
That's
10 inch?
it was about 5 inches to 13 inches, I think was the range.
Okay. I think I'm even more confused than I started out, but that's okay. I've been there before. My last question, I think is, as this thing progresses down the line, are you guys, maybe a question to Assistant Secretary Banks, are you guys going to have some outreach efforts to help all us non-trout biologists figure out what the heck's going on?
Assistant Secretary Banks, I was going to call on you.
I'm glad you asked that question, Commissioner Corfield, and Jason set it up perfectly. What we're hoping to do with this presentation today is really to spark some discussion from you guys. We don't need decisions today, obviously, this is not an action item, but we do need a little bit of guidance from you guys. And he pointed out the very first and most crucial piece is, are you all comfortable with a slow rebuilding, a moderate rebuilding, or a fast rebuilding? And he pointed it out perfectly. If you want this stock to be rebuilt quickly, it's going to come with a lot of pain to the anglers. If you want to rebuild slowly, we can slowly rebuild that thing over the course of 10, 12, 15 years and not have much of a difference in the creel and size limits. We're, as Jason correctly pointed out, we've been concentrating on that 20% savings each year because that's more of a moderate rebuild period. We feel like that's appropriate. It takes 5 or so years to rebuild, but it's going to come with a little bit of pain to the anglers, but not tremendous amounts. And so we want some sort of a guidance from you guys on are we looking at the right rebuilding time frame for you guys? The second one is what you just brought up, Commissioner Corville. We need some guidance from you guys as to what kind of public outreach would y'all like to see? Typically with regulations, we bring a notice of intent to the commission. You all pass a notice of intent. That tells the public, that gives the public notice of the intent of the commission, and then we go out for public comments. But in this case, I do think there's tremendous value in us taking this information to the public for a whole round of public meetings and then taking that input and then bringing you guys a proposal. And we wanted to make sure that y'all were comfortable with that process rather than the traditional process. And then thirdly, do you all, like Jason said with this slide, do you all want us to analyze other options? I mean, we've basically been concentrating on size and creel limits because that's what everybody understands for the most part.
But there's many other states around the country that use things like seasonal fisheries closures, for instance. I think it's North Carolina, Jason, that does a particular special regulation following a hard freeze event. So there's all these other options out there. You could reduce limits on particular sections of the fishery. I've heard comments about reducing or removing the ability for guides and guide helpers to catch a limit or keep their limit, things like that. So we would like to hear some input from you guys. Are we looking at the right options, or do you want us to analyze other types of options? So those are the three things that we really need some guidance from the commission on today.
Commissioner Sam?
The only thing I might suggest, that we could maybe possibly do a mail out or something like that to all license holders. And maybe you'd get 2 or 3 different groups of different questions that we may want to ask regarding different things all at one time. We hadn't done a mail out in a long time, haven't we?
Well, that's true. I think mail surveys we've been trying to get away from because of the expense of it. We've moved more to email surveys, but we can look into it.
Yeah, that or email.
Yeah, email would be good. Save a lot of paper. More people are moving to that. Anyway, at least most people, I think, look at emails if they have the correct ones. Is that required on licenses that they have that?
It's not required, but it is highly recommended and requested when folks sign up for a license.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else from the commission? Commissioner Smitko?
I know y'all want feedback, and one part of me would think that, hey, let's do a 2-week closure here, 2-week closure there, 2-week closure there, and look at the potential positive impact of that. But then on the other hand, closures seem like they would have more of an economic detriment. If you have people renting camps and hiring guides and buying bait, then you're not just affecting the angler, you're affecting everyone. So that's a problem. And I'd like to, talk to folks and get their opinion. I'm a big believer in biting the bullet, enduring the maximum pain for the shortest amount of time to get where, you want to be. And I think as long as you can still go and catch some fish, take the maximum pain, and then the situation is going to greatly improve in a short amount of time. I would think, though, that we could reach out to other folks like CCA, I'm sure, can talk to their membership, a lot of trout fishermen there, and give us an idea of where their membership is leaning. And I'd certainly appreciate if y'all could do that, which will help in the gathering of data and opinion data. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Corville?
I don't know how much time we got, but I'm gonna be a mess here.
Now, we don't have an NOI here.
Well, Assistant Secretary Banks asked for some guidance, and I've got plenty of issues, and I don't need to make trout another one, but looks like it might happen. So the 20-inch fish, what I'm hung up on is, I know, and listening to you guys, that obviously the bigger females, best spawners, the ones we need to wrap our hands around and take to heaven together with us. What I think I'd like if in your public meetings maybe is it's called a slot limit. When you reference a slot limit, when you get to 20 inch, are you saying at 21 inches you got to throw it back? Or are you talking about potentially a X amount of fish over 20 inches you can keep, but you can't keep 25 trout over 20 inches? Can y'all help me on that?
Well, we didn't model it in that sense, and that'd be pretty difficult to, because you'd have to figure out what proportion of the population might keep one over, or that would get really difficult to model. And the other thing with that slot limit above 20 inches too, that the savings you get are very minimal if you went higher. Well, that's a good break. I don't know if Joe can help me out. I'm not saying.
And look, I'm not suggesting I get an answer here. What I guess where I'm going with, as far as questions that you want to ask the public, or if you're looking for guidance from us, I would lob it all out there. But I guess my feeling, and I'm a little bit different than Commissioner Smitko, is, and I keep hearing this environmental factor thing. It's hard for me to believe that we're not seeing symptoms of incredible, unprecedented river water for the last 6 years. At least one freeze that we feel fairly confident had an incredible damaging effect. So that all leads me to this question back on this female growth. So we know we have a bunch of 12-inch fish, 10 to 12, 15-inch fish out there cruising around. We're catching some of them aren't. I'm not catching any of them, by the way, but whatever. How long does it take those 12-inch fish to get to the promised land if we believe the 20-inch fish is our target, or is that an 18-inch fish has a high enough fecundity rate that we feel warm and fuzzy about? Those are the questions that I have that we can't answer today, but that is so where I'm going with. Maybe the public says, look, I'm fine with, let's pick a 18-inch slot limit and you keep 2 over 18 or whatever the numbers are. I don't know. I'm not suggesting I have a preference right now, but those are the kinds of things, if you're looking for guidance from what just I'm interested in listening to people who do get to fish a lot, what would matter to them, if you will. And the question that you asked is, do you want this an overnight improvement? Which I don't think, if we're dealing with environmental factors, we get overnight improvement and the rate at which these fish grow. So that's, if you're looking for guidance from me, which I'm all over the place as usual, that's where I'm at. And
So
what I'd like to get feedback on.
just to follow up on those 20-inch trout with those females, obviously that growth curve has got a lot of, we're looking at the mean of that growth curve. There's going to be fish that fall on both extreme ends, but you could have one of those females be 20 inches by age 3 or 4, or much that on average, maybe 3 or 4, but there's going to be extremes on either end of that.
And do we believe that is I know every fish has some sweet spot, but that female is the magic producer. Is there such thing in the trout world?
Not for trout. Not that we're seeing. We've had a study, Commissioner Corville, and we've not seen increased fecundity or spawning frequency at older age classes.
What the hell is wrong with these trout in Louisiana?
Not sure. In fact, it's really hard to get at. In fact, even Florida's having a hard time getting at that. Do older, larger trout spawn more, and are they just spawn better? Do they spawn more? The jury's still out on that. So right now, the spawning stock biomass out there is a bunch of 1-year-olds and some 2-year-olds, very few 3-year-old plus. And that's what's generating the recruitment we're seeing. So if we do have some kind of environmental impact that impacts recruitment even more, or some episodic event that impacts those age classes, we're in trouble.
Or we could go the other way, saying things get sweet and our trout go bonkers.
Commissioner Smitko?
I like to think.
So, wait a minute, if there's no increase in fecundity with age, why are we worried about 20 inches and above?
To protect some brooders, just to protect some brooders. Same thing we do with red drum, black drum.
I thought you just said you can't say that a 5-year-old female has any increase in fecundity over a 2-year-old.
That's why we're presenting a minimum length limit and a slot limit. Like I said, the jury's still out on it. Are they more fecund at older age classes? But we can manage either way, a minimum size limit or a slot limit.
Wait a minute. But I know with red snapper, from what I think I remember, the older they are, the more they produce, correct?
For red snapper, yeah, that's been proven.
Okay.
There is some drop off in that as they get older. So there's kind of a peak.
Right, but there's like an X-year-old red snapper's the one girl red snapper's the one you want because she's having millions of babies. But you're telling me that there's no science right now that says a 5-year-old female trout is gonna have more eggs or
Not definitively. In fact, our own department study does not show that.
then why in the world would we be worried about the size limits?
It's presented in there as an option and to rebuild that, if that were the option chosen, and to help rebuild that.
Thank you all
age
very
structure.
much. We're gonna go ahead and, we've talked about this. This is not a
We got
notice
to-
of intent. We have lots of questions here. And I'm gonna make a suggestion that the commissioners that have questions get with the department, with you guys, and ask some of these questions. In the meantime, we're gonna have the surveys going out. We're gonna have, the associations and groups get together, give us some input, and we'll have a lot more information we can deal with to make a better management decision. And I would just suggest that, because we could talk about this all day. It's something that I'm closing my mouth right now, because I have a lot to say on the subject right now, and I will intend to go ahead and make my own questions to you guys, and I would suggest the rest of the commissioners do that. In the meantime, we'll get some more information. We make a better decision.
Thank you.
So
I have one question about the meeting schedule. How soon will those things start? And then I guess once you guys sort that out, if you could share the meeting locations, and I guess I would hope maybe we could have one here, and we'll have to make it officially not a commission meeting, but meetings here are convenient. And I guess maybe you have one in Lafayette, and Selfish, but once you have that, if you can share that with us, because I'm sure a lot of us would want to hear more details about the science. We can try and wrap our head around that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now that we've gotten the guidance that we needed from you guys, and I appreciate that. Y'all give us very good guidance and discussion from Ms. Smitko about all 3 points that I made, and I appreciate that. But now we know which way we're going with the public meetings. We'll be able to get a schedule out to you guys and so we can set all that up. And thankfully, we've had groups reach out to us that want to help us coordinate that. And so that's great. That's going to be the coordination with the angler groups that you guys talked about.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Adrians. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I'd do without you. I got so caught up in this discussion here. We have one public comment. Mr. Joshua Ellender, would you please come up here, state your name and address, and listen to what you have to say. Thank you.
Morning, Joshua Ellender. Just wanted to make a comment about speckled trout since we talked about it. Sorry. I'm sorry. I live in Houma, Louisiana. Fish out of Cocodrie. And I'm a charter captain. I own Ellender Charters. I'm sorry about that. So speckled trout, some of the things I heard discussing, one of the options was actually to raise the minimum size limit, excuse me. Just this in 2019, this year, if we were to raise it to 14 inches, probably that would have reduced probably 80% of my catch that I brought back to the dock. Just to give y'all an example of how many small fish we caught. Now, I caught a lot of numbers, but they were the 10 to 12 and a quarter, and you were stretching sometimes at 12 and a quarter to get it in there, but it was just an enormous amount of small fish. So just so y'all know what I'm seeing on the coast, I haven't seen a lot of big fish. When I started out guiding in 2008, it was great. Like Commissioner Smitko said, everybody was catching, they were all big, and then I saw, I was talking to Harry earlier about the number of big fish being brought back in is not there. And I'm personally seeing that. In the short amount of time that I've owned my business, I personally have seen a huge decline. Now that goes all the same way with how we're losing land and all the environmental factors in there. Always understood that a bigger fish laid more eggs, maybe not spawned more often, but laid more eggs, which I'm surprised to hear that might even be the case. So that's kind of alarming as well. One thing that makes sense to me, if the majority of our fish in Louisiana are spawning or 1 to 2 years of age, raising that to 14 inches could kind of alleviate the problem. You know, you take away those 8 to 14 inch trout. Now, I understand a 2-year-old trout could be a little bit bigger, but the vast majority, if that's our spawners, that could definitely help increase, you know, I forget the term to, but just make more fish available, you know, and spawn more. Let's see what else I wanted to say. One more thing about guides limit, and I heard Mr. Banks mention that. So guides limit, you know, for me, I am required to buy a recreational fishing license to actually operate my charter business, right? So I have the option to to catch my limit, take it home, eat just like anybody else. The problem comes in if you take that away from me. Is I'll give you an example of a red snapper for the federal fisheries, right? Red snapper, a person who has a reef fish permit. When they go out fishing in their boat, they take their customers. They're not allowed to keep their catch. You know, the captain, the crew's catch. They can allow the customers keep. When they want to go out and take their family to go catch red snapper, they still are not allowed to keep their own red snapper because that boat is actually permanent. And I don't really know many people who are fishing guides who can afford to have 2 boats, a personal boat and a charter boat, right? So therefore, they are no longer allowed to catch red snapper unless they go on somebody else's boat and have to pay somebody else or a buddy. So I want y'all to remember that when you take that in consideration of taking away the guide's limit. I'm not saying I'm for it or against it. I'm saying I don't want to be limited when I take my personal charter boat, but I want to take it for a personal trip to be able to catch speckled trout. You know, so please remember that.
I think you'll be able to do that. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 14.
Mr. Chairman, I got one more question. That's
No, you don't.
procedural. I did. For tonight.
Thank you.
The speckled trout stock assessment is every 5 years. Am I accurate?
That one's not set in a time frame. We will do it as needed, or typically at least try to do it.
So it's not inconceivable for us to maybe run another one in a shorter time period, assuming we have stable weather, if you will, if that makes any sense, maybe 2 years from now or something like that. I was of the impression it was every 5 years, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think that's how we try to typically do it about every 5 years. We had taken some time recently because we were trying to get our LaCreel data to fall in line with the old MRIP data. And trying to get those to mesh, it's taken a while before we could really do another stock assessment. It's not one of the Fab Five or whatever you call it here, that where we have to do it every certain amount of time. But I mean, we'd like to do it about every 5 years, but that doesn't mean we can't do it earlier. It's just a law of diminishing returns on the overall amount of stock assessments we can do. Joe is very good, and Joe's staff is very good, but they can only do so many stock assessments for so many different species each year. So
Okay, no,
it just makes it difficult. If you recall, we're doing crab and all kinds of things. So.
I appreciate that. I guess that would be my last comment on what I'm looking for, but I'd like for a consideration of maybe one, not next year, obviously, but maybe split that 5 years, maybe down to 2 years from now or something. Just especially if we take action, we can potentially see some results for those fish responding from more favorable environmental conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Corbett. Moving on, we're going to agenda item 14 to discuss the 2020 recreational red snapper season. Again, Mr. Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to thank Joe West and Taylor Allgood and Adrian Zhang, that our stock assessment guys. They put a lot of work into that information you just saw. And like Tommy, I'm the guy up here with the great hair that gets to present it. So this is what we wanted to do is get a discussion of the 2020 recreational red snapper season started. Now that state management is in place, and we may have to give the Gulf Council some idea of what direction we may be taking. So this is nothing to set the season. This is just purely a discussion, but I'm going to start with a review of 2019. So we opened the season May 24th as a weekend only. That was the Friday before Memorial Day, if you recall. We included the 4th of July and the Mondays of Memorial Day and Labor Day. We closed that season from September 3rd through the 26th while we got some landings information in. Saw we still had a good amount of quota. So we reopened on September 27th for weekends only. And then we added the Monday of Veterans Day during that time period. And then we opened on a 7-day-a-week basis beginning November 28th. And that gave us 109 total days of red snapper fishing in 2019. And that's not just state waters, that was access to the EEZ. So where'd we end up? Now, one thing to keep in mind with these numbers is December 30th and 31st doesn't fall in the most recent estimates we have. So those 2 days are still out there and we won't get those till next week. But we ended up with 848,340 pounds landed. We ended up with a very good ending week, which you'll see as we move a little further. That equates to about 104% of our quota. State charter harvest out of that was about 52,667 pounds, and federal charter was 102,562 pounds. Our average annual mean weight for snapper for private recreational was 7.44 pounds and 8.65 pounds for charter. And at the end of the year, as I mentioned, we were a little over. We ended up 31,901 pounds over without those 2 days yet to come in. So here's that table. It has grown tremendously over the season since we were open so long. But you can see that last week there, we came in at 47,550 pounds. So that bumped us over. This is just that in graphical form. And this is kind of where we fell out over the years. Now, if you recall, just 2018 and 2019 are only state charter and private recreational. Prior to that, without the EFP, we didn't have a mechanism to separate federal and state charter. So those numbers are not apples to apples, but just to get an idea where we've been. And those quotas have also, those limits have adjusted over those years. This is some of our EFP data. Now, it also doesn't, and it's cut off down there, I apologize. 2018's cut off that graphic, but you can see it in your presentation. In 2018, the season closed in week 32. So that would be, if you were trying to compare these two and look at 2019, the results from 18 and 19 are actually very similar. I think they were off very little as far as number of trips fished, not fished, snapper kept and discarded. It was very close if you look at the two for the time period. They were open at the same time. But the end result is we had this, not very many anglers took advantage of this for one reason or another. I just wanted to show you a couple, and I apologize if these are not the best colors. This is landed weight of those private recreationally harvested red snapper in 2018 and 19. And 2018 is the lighter blue there, and the 2019 is the darker blue or black. And you can see we had smaller weight-wise, we had lighter red snapper this year. This is on the charter side, same thing, looking at weight, and you can see even there was a little shift towards those less heavy snap. This is length landed in 2018 and 19, and you can see, say, as you would expect, lighter weight. We also had smaller fish landed this year. Same with charter. That's a wrap up of 2019, and I'm happy to take any questions before we begin.
Commissioner Smitko?
Does that worry you, that weight and length change in 1 year?
No, I'm not worried about it. It just shows that as you get these different size classes that move through the fishery this year, there were smaller fish that folks took advantage of.
Commissioner Corville?
Thank you, Mr. Adrian. And again, Assistant Secretary Banks, I see Mr. Swindell and Mr. Dugai in here. Thank you guys for your efforts on state management. And I'd like to congratulate the Louisiana red snapper anglers for not giving a fish to any other Gulf state. Hallelujah.
Thank you very much. We've had a good year, and one more time, hats off. It's come full circle, I think. So with that, we have one comment card. Thank you, Mr. Adrian.
Sure. There is a second part to this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we wanted to kind of start that discussion of the 2020 season and just get a little, I know you have an NOI slated next on the agenda, but I just wanted to get some feedback on kind of the thoughts of where y'all were headed for the 2020 season. Thinking about the same parameters, same start time, sorts of things. I just, if you had any at this point.
Commissioner Corville?
I'd like for you guys to evaluate a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday season structure.
Sure, we can do.
We have data, I think, from the Thursday effort. But I think while I thoroughly enjoyed fall fishing this year, we really need to probably target that summertime window. And I know it might not be popular with a lot of marinas, but it sure seems like that Labor Day fishing effort is not near as significant as we would have once anticipated. So I'll voice it before, I'll voice it again. I think when the kids are out of school and have an opportunity to go fishing, finding that sweet spot in there is great. I know with Amberjack and the wonderful job you guys have done getting that, so some August snapper fishing is nice when that amberjack fishing starts. But the fall fishing was great. I know a lot of people enjoyed it, but it may be that we need to consider that Thursday through Sunday type fishing might be worth looking at and considering, and maybe perhaps getting feedback during those meetings from the snapper anglers.
We can certainly look at that Thursday through Sunday and bring that as part of any season presentation.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Mr. Adrian? Anything else?
Just trying to get some feedback of any scenarios, as Commissioner Corville alluded to, the Thursday through Sunday, or anything else you'd like us to look at before, or that you had in mind before we start moving towards that.
And so I'd suggest if anyone has any light bulb ideas, go ahead and just send them on to Jason. And if y'all got any ideas, let us know. Thank you very much. We have one comment card, Mr. Ellender.
Hello again, Joshua Ellender from Houma, Louisiana, and talking for myself this time as a recreational fisherman. Obviously, I don't have a federal permit to go red snapper fishing, but I love to do it. One of the things that I like to for the council to consider is actually going to, instead of just a Thursday through Sunday, going to 7 days a week. We, for one, I'm a charter fisherman. Everybody loves fishing on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I just don't get the chance to go out there as often as I would like to go experience red snapper. Another example would be how many offshore workers that we have that work 7 and 7, 14 and 14, where if it's just on the weekends they can't go a lot of times because they work. So I think you're just excluding a lot of people out of the equation. So I would just like to see it open up, whether it's just a little bit shorter season in the summer and not go through all the way through December. Because like you said, the majority of people fish when the kids are out of school, hands down. When they go back in school, it's very seldom. And besides just being open on the weekends, what if you have those weather days? And that happened a lot this summer. And we are getting windier and windier every year, it seems like. And I saw a lot of people comment, man, it's slick calm during the week, but it's windy as can be on the weekend. We can't go unless we have a 42-foot boat. So I would like to see if y'all could consider just moving it to a 7-day week, at least part of the season to where more people can enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 15, to receive and consider a notice of intent to modify the opening and closing dates of the recreational red snapper season and secretarial authorities with respect thereto. Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not have a presentation for this. This is, we figured since there's two parts to this change. One is aligning the proposed season in the rule with what has been the status quo as of recently, shifting the opening date that's in the rule from the Saturday before Palm Sunday to the Friday before Memorial Day. And the other part of that is we modified the language in relation to no delegation for that red snapper fishery, because there was some archaic language in there about sub-regional management. And we added size limit to the secretarial authority allowed in there, because with the state management, there's allowance to adjust the bag limit from 2 up to 4 and the size limit from between 14 and 18 inches. So there's that allowance. So we just wanted to align this with what's currently going on. And I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Corville?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm kind of struggling to understand the need and intent of this, but I think I got part of it. The fact is, we're not going to open that mandated opening for Palm Sunday. We're kind of moving that back to Memorial Day. But this by no means sets the red snapper season. We're going to do that at an upcoming meeting. So for anybody in the public who thinks, holy cow, they just did it, I didn't get any input, that's not what is occurring here. Am I correct in that?
Correct. This does not take away any of your authority or the way we've been operating, which is we're gonna present a season DE to y'all. This is just fixing it so we don't have to write that DE to delay the season like we have the past few years. And this is an option that if you actually chose to do nothing, then this would be how the season runs, but it doesn't change anything in the way we've been operating currently.
So along those lines, I'd like to add that the red snapper season will be open, assuming we haven't met our quota, on July 4th, because this leaves out Wednesday. And I don't know why I'm so hung up on it, but I am.
So the July 4th would be an
July 4th
open day anytime.
Will be an open day for fishing of red snapper if the annual limit hasn't been met. I don't want to open it if we caught all that fish in the first 2 weeks of the season. But if we have quota to fish, again, like I said, this thing leaves out Wednesday when it falls on a Wednesday. It's semantics. I personally would like to see us get rid of a lot of this, but I understand the intent. It's fixing what we're not doing.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Corville. Any other questions?
When do we think we're gonna set the red snapper season? What month are you guys sort of anticipating so we can get people on notice that they got something burning a hole in their shorts, they need to speak up?
I think we've traditionally brought that in that April commission meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? Anything else, Ms. Adrians? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. We have a vote to do on this. So I ask that the commission, someone make a motion to, motion to approve. Commissioner Hogan makes a motion, second by Commissioner Sammy. Hearing no discussion.
So is the motion on the table right now to approve it as presented?
Yes.
In this document and not with Commissioner Corville's
want-
proposed amendments?
Oh, did you want to make an amendment? I didn't hear an amendment.
I want the 4th of July to be
Oh, okay.
an open date. Assuming we don't
I'm
have
sorry.
We haven't met our quota.
Regardless of
I'd
that
like for
season
Commissioner
structure,
Hogan to consider that.
just so I'm clear with it. Regardless of the season structure.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yeah.
you okay with that? That's okay. Okay, and Commissioner Samony,
Yep.
please reflect that in the motion, Ms. Falcon.
And Chairman Sunseri, just so I make sure I capture the amendment appropriately, Commissioner Corville would like a weekend-only fishery with the exception of the Monday of Memorial Day being classified as a weekend and the Monday of Labor Day being classified as a weekend, and then a holiday on the 4th of July, no matter what day of the week it falls.
And you can leave in that if the 4th falls on a Thursday, it's included, or if the 4th falls on a Monday.
It's just open on the
Yeah,
4th of
it
July.
is open on 4th of
So
July.
you're- So we're going through a weekend and holiday.
Right.
Okay.
As opposed to,
Right now, it leaves out Wednesday. 4th of July falls on Wednesday. In theory, we're not open.
Right.
This is the man.
Yeah.
So we have that captured, and with that, all in favor, say aye. Opposed, unanimously supported. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item 16, to request the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to survey the water bottoms of the state of Louisiana using any funding source that may be used to fund the survey. Allison Sarian and Ms. Carolina work. With that, I'm going to pass the gavel on to the Vice Chair so that I'll be able to go ahead and discuss this. Ms. Borg.
Yes, my name is Carolina Bork, the Oyster Program Manager for Wildlife and Fisheries. And before I start, I just want to say thank you, Commissioners, Chairman, and Wildlife and Fisheries employees, and everybody else that is here today for this presentation, and the staff that collects the data to make this presentation possible. We were requested to make this brief presentation, so I'm just going to give you an overview of the Louisiana Water Bottom Assessment Surveys in Louisiana. So just a little background on the history of oysters in Louisiana. The oyster beds were always a food source in Louisiana. Since the 1800s, oysters were harvested from the natural reefs. So historically, the European immigrants moving to the US, and they helped develop the modern oyster industry. And they introduced specific farming techniques. By the 1870s, due to concerns at the time already, concerns to the damage of oyster reefs, the legislature passed an act number 18, closing the oyster season and providing penalties for taking oysters out of season. And also historically, the first stage oyster lease was in 1902. And since then, Louisiana has become the nation's largest producer of oysters due to the private individual cultivating oysters in between in those lands. So an overview of the historical water bottom surveys in Louisiana. It was done in the early 1900s. There's a couple of the reports done by Monroe, and the Legislative Investigative Commission, composed of 2 senators and 3 representatives, appointed them to study the oyster industry at the time. So they wanted facts of oyster spawning, facts, laws, anything related to the industry. The Bureau of Fisheries made a survey of the oyster beds on the coast between Mississippi Sound on the east side of the coast all the way to the Atchafalaya River. So it's a pretty extensive survey. And you know, just to give you an idea, this is in the 1900s we're talking about. No technology, just basic pulling and dredging and, you know, pulling the bottom, saying, okay, it's mud, scatter shell, just what is out there, the shape of the shells, the currents. And so it's a very interesting report. They recorded very detailed information on the salinity, food, spawning, growth, predators, any crevasses in different areas, and any oyster industry activities. They also, once the report was done, they made recommendations related to conservation, protection, administration, and multiple laws at the time were submitted to the legislature. On the right side of the screen, you can see the map. That map was one of the maps that they produced, showing in red exactly some of the oyster reefs at the time. That's San Bernard Parish on the east side of Louisiana. Currently, the currently status of the water bottom surveys in Louisiana. So Wildlife and Fisheries began collecting oyster samples, the biological samples that we collect. Almost, our crew, our biologists are out there almost every day. And those samples, the data collected started in the 1970s for oyster samples. Since 1990s or so, oyster stock assessments were prepared annually. You can have, they are available online as PDF form, so it's available to anyone. And on another side, side-scan sonar data and the assessment technology compared to the 1900 improved a lot. It's completely different technology than, just pulling and dredging and such. There's a lot of data out there collected between different state agencies, for example, Wildlife and Fisheries and CPRA. Different industry and contractors also conduct the side-scan sonar, and some of them are available online. CPRA has a lot of reports out there that is accessible to the public. And just to give you an idea of price to use that side-scan sonar to do a sub-bottom profile, depending, there's no one price fits all, is whatever you want. There's different technologies for different type of scanning. So just a price, for example, for 100 acres in a small area, but very high detail of the sub-bottom profile cost the state $6,800. And another one that we did in 2011, that was a much bigger area. We scanned 167,000 acres at the time, and it cost us a little cheaper, so it was $600. So there's a lot of variation on how big and how much mileage and the difference in how detailed you want and such. And with that, I take any questions, or if Chairman Sansari wants to add anything to the information.
I do have some things I want to add. I had requested this item be placed on the agenda because of the changes that have occurred over the last decade since the oil disaster. We have seen a decline in oyster productivity on the public oyster grounds specifically, and mainly those primary public oyster grounds east of the Mississippi River that used to produce 40% of all oyster production. And we've seen a decline in the Central Florida state as well, in the Terrebonne, St. Mary, Lafourche area. Jefferson, Barataria, even though it's mainly leased areas, we do have some public oyster ground there, but there has been challenges with even the oyster leaseholders. We've had some things that have occurred, changes in hydrology, bottom makeup, and all these sorts of things that has happened. And it's been pretty drastic over my career. And I've seen the coast going away from the time I got involved in this business 41 years ago. So there are some funding sources. We have, since oil spill, there was a natural resource damage assessment that was put out, lots of funds in there. This actually fits right into that type of funding. There's also Another group that there's funds, gosh, I can't think of Mike and what the name of that group is. Patrick, help.
NIFWIF, National,
NIFWIF, yeah. There are funds available that can be attained to do this. We haven't really done what I would consider a assessment as good as what Moore and Pope did since that time 120 years ago. And with these new, we just have passed the lifting of the oyster moratorium to allow for oyster leasing in the state of Louisiana again. And I think that information gained could be very helpful in assessing, the types of bottoms that are going to be utilized to cultivate oysters to make Louisiana more productive. And also to assess the current public oyster grounds and private water bottoms to see what has occurred over the years in these leases and public oyster grounds and what those bottoms are looking like today. The funds are there. It's just, I come here today to ask the commission if they would consider maybe putting together a letter down the line to make this request in writing, maybe to the natural resource damage assessment group, and as well as the NIFWIF people, and see if we possibly can get funding to be able to do this assessment that's long overdue, in my opinion. We've had some, this past year, with the opening of the Bonnie County spill went 2 times in 1 year, which is unprecedented. And the comments that I've heard is that 100% are dead. It's, there's huge concerns about for anyone who is in this business. So that's what I come here today and make a request. We don't have to do anything as far as writing a letter, because that was not written on the agenda, but it could be in the future if someone down the line wants to make that agenda request. And with that, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm vitally involved in the oyster industry also. I'm the end consumer. And my quality and the price of the oysters are not where I want them to be. And I know I don't understand what I'd like to about this industry. And we don't have time today, but part of what kind of in line with what you're asking for with this survey information is just to help us with our understanding of, I don't know what the acres of public oyster production is compared to the private oyster leases. But I'd like to understand all that. I'd like to know, how do we know that the cultivation is occurring on those private leases, what we can do to help the cultivation. I do understand a little bit about row crop, and I know I have had farmers that went out there and threw out the seed and didn't prepare and till properly. They didn't fertilize, and they waited for the insurance payments to come in. And maybe some of that happened with BP and all. I don't know, but I'd like to know the answer to that. And as opposed to, so I know there's a difference between the intense cultivation, what you reap it in your harvest, and what you get if you're just gonna sub it out to somebody else and let them get what little bit they can. But I'd like to have that part of the presentation, Ms. Borkin. Y'all may have all that information readily available and you can start feeding it to me, but at some point I'd like to have those questions answered.
Well, we do, just to add, we do not usually sample the oyster leases, so we don't have readily available leases. Different leaseholders have different management.
Right, I understand, but they belong to the public, and they're a valuable economic input to the state of Louisiana. And as a young freshman legislator, I used to question what these things were worth, you know, and what they leased out for. And I was told, oh, Joe, that's political, and these people have all of this and all. Well, I ain't in politics anymore. Shoot me, I got a gun, too. We'll have the battle. But I'd kind of like to know that, and if they got our leases and they're not doing the proper cultivation, then we need to know that. We need to answer those questions, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. And if we're not being responsible, I hope we are, with our public oyster grounds, and I want to know the answer to that. What are we doing? You know?
Well, I'll just say in short, there is no legal requirement for a oyster lease to be cultivated. So we'll start.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's a great answer, but it doesn't seem like a great answer in my mind.
Well, I can understand. Where
I would rather put that oyster lease up and see if there's somebody interested in doing intensive cultivation and growing oysters, and my price would come down, the economy would go up.
Completely understand.
More questions or comments?
Bingo.
And when the gun battle starts, I want you right there beside me, Miss Boy.
I appreciate that. With that, I'm going to take back the gavel. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next item, number 17. To receive a report on the wildlife fisheries collection efforts of civil restitution resulting from game and fish violations.
Mr. Chairman, before I approach the podium on that matter, on the last one, that was not a formal action taken. That was an informal request, an informal discussion based on. Okay.
That's all it was.
Okay.
And I would, suggest it down the line, and I think I said it in the discussion, was that this commission may make a recommendation to write a letter to the different agencies that may be able to help us fund a report, an extensive report. That is, thank you. Thanks. And that's, now we're to 17, Mr. Garrett.
All right, thank you, Chairman Sunseri. Before I get started, I would also like to thank Commissioner Samani for his time on the commission and for being such a supporter of the department and a good partner in conservation. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, buddy.
This is kind of a primer for the next agenda item. This is a discussion of what civil restitution is, what the legal framework and our ability to collect civil restitution, and then what our collection efforts have been historically. So briefly, the civil restitution legal framework. The legislature back in the 80s, 1988, provided this legal framework. And it basically says anybody who illegally takes or injures wildlife or aquatic life is liable to the state for the taking of that public trust resource. It gave this commission the ability to establish guidelines and values for those wildlife and aquatic life resources. Y'all have done that in 1989. It was amended in 2011. And as you'll see, the next topic is to revisit those values. It charges the department to demand restitution for injured or taken fish or wildlife that was taken illegally. And the definition of take here is taken, killed, caught, possessed, or injured. The law does give the ability to seek this restitution to 3 different entities. It gives it to the attorney of the department. It gives it to the attorney general or the district attorney in the parish in which the violation occurred, and then allows that district attorney a 40% retention of whatever fee is collected.
Any of those entities may bring civil action to collect civil restitution penalties. It further provides that the department can not go through the district courts and can rather seek civil restitution penalties through adjudicatory action, which is in front of an administrative law judge.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Corbell?
Thank you. Mr. Garrett, we've all heard the horror stories of DAs not pursuing wildlife charges. So am I reading this right, that is this almost an incentive for them to pursue it?
It's absolutely that.
And they still aren't doing it at 40% of the value.
And I would be willing to bet that there are most, if not all, DAs do not even know about their ability to retain 40%. But I think it's immaterial because of the program that we've stood up. And if you'll give me a moment, I'll, in my next slide, explain the process that we're taking.
Right. But that's new news to me. Thank you.
Right,
Yes, sir.
exactly.
So in addition to our ability to go through the adjudicatory process, which I guess to cut to the chase is what we've stood up in the past 2 years, to not have to rely on other entities to seek this restitution. In addition to just the fines or values that this commission sets, it also gives us the ability to collect court costs and fees. And then any failure to pay on behalf of a person who is found owing the civil penalty, we can revoke and suspend their hunting and fishing licenses until these fees are paid. And then finally, the recovery of these penalties are deposited into the conservation fund, which acts as our operating fund, with the exception of we need to have a $100,000 balance in the enforcement emergency situation fund. If that fund is above $100,000, everything else spills over into our general conservation fund. So,
Can I interrupt you? Before
yes,
we
sir.
go on?
Absolutely.
Here's questions as we go.
I'll move back 1 second.
What is that enforcement? I didn't realize that. What is that enforcement?
So it is an account that is within the conservation fund. So it still falls within the pot of the conservation fund. And I'll actually defer that question to either Undersecretary McClinton or to Colonel Martin. My understanding is, while they're having a discussion, is that it's for our enforcement to charge for actually acting for emergency purposes, search and rescue.
It's emergency search and rescue or all search and rescue?
Commissioner can be fair. So what it is, it's an account that it's basically capped at a certain amount. And we use that for search and rescue. If something's not declared an emergency by GOSIP or FEMA, if the governor doesn't declare an emergency, then we do not get reimbursed for our time and efforts. So at that time, that's whenever we utilize that account to cover our cost up to that amount. So it's basically set up, it's $100,000. And anyway, we can use that. If something's declared, it's a major, like the floods or hurricane events, we'll get reimbursed through FEMA. We don't utilize that. It's just set aside for, I guess, smaller flooding that maybe have happened along the Sabine River. Yeah, that meet that threshold.
Okay, would you give us a history of that fund balance? Not today.
I can, sir, but not right now.
Yeah, thank you. The other question I have is, do we get to charge anything for those hearings that we're having around the state?
Absolutely.
On top of the restitution amount,
correct.
we get to charge for having to prosecute it?
We do, and that amount that we've determined what our costs are and what we pay the judges, the court costs come out to $241.61.
That's on top of the restitution.
On top of the restitution if they're found owing that restitution.
You bill more than that by the hour, don't you, Mr. Garrett?
I wish. Thanks. Maybe in the private sector. So that's kind of the legal framework. Now let me give you a little background on how we've implemented this program in the past. Restitution values, again, were established in 1989 following the 1988 enabling legislation. It was only adjusted one time, and that was in August of 2011, so just in time for our fiscal year 2012. I'll kind of give you three different categories. The pre-2011 category, the 2011 to 2018 post-adjustment, and then 18 and 19, which is where we've implemented our adjudicatory hearings. So historically, as Commissioner Corville kind of
noted to us our collection efforts were just a combination of us sending letters to people via snail mail, telling them that they owed restitution, and then relying on criminal prosecution to provide the due process and to allow for the district attorneys to collect on our behalf, as the law does allow for, even foregoing the 40% for their efforts. Between the time, so I've only provided numbers going back to 2008. I didn't have accurate numbers going all the way back to the 80s, but I think you can see a general enough pattern here that our collections prior to FY11 was $69,000 annually, and we were getting about 45% of the restitution that was owed. After the commission adjusted the rates, and I'll go ahead and say, across the board, they were pretty much raised because it had been a couple of decades before since they were. Those collections did go up, as you might expect, getting higher amounts for civil restitution. So they jumped up to around $144,000 annually, but our collection rate went down. And again, I think that's intuitive. If you're charging people more, you're going to have more people that may want to do the right thing, but if their feet aren't held to the fire, they may not be able. They're less likely to do it. So we did collect more, but our collection rate went down. Beyond that, we had very little. We didn't have a hammer. We didn't have a way to revoke or suspend licenses. Keep in mind, we were relying on the due process provided through the criminal courts. Well, as we've discussed, many of these get PTI'd, many of them are null prost, many of them we just don't get final disposition on. And without that final disposition, we can't go and suspend or revoke someone's license. So after looking at these numbers and knowing that, hey, our enforcement agents go put their lives on the line, they're out there with people with guns, they are defending the wildlife and aquatic life species of the state, and it's a public trust, we should do more to collect. And so beginning July 1st, 2017, we took all of our civil restitution demands, brought them in-house. We started sending certified letters and holding adjudication through ALJs. Our collections jumped up in 2018 to $260,000, and that was at a 61% collection rate. They dipped in FY 2019, and I would suggest to you that that's not an indication that we're less effective in 2019. It's because the FY 2019 period ended in July, and we just haven't finished prosecuting or litigating those cases, and there's still payment plans that are being brought in. So I would expect the 2019 numbers to go up. But even if we accept them with what they are, if you look at 18 to 19, our collections went up to 50% collection rate. We've got over $250,000 in collections. We are now able to suspend and revoke licenses because we've got adjudications from judges. We're able to apply the $241 court costs. And so just to give you some numbers, we've had 34 hearings since the inception of this program. This is across all 8 regions. Typically, each region gets biannual hearing dates. Some regions like New Orleans, where you have commercial and just more of the fishing saltwater aspect of it, we have up to 4 or 5 hearings in those regions, just depending on caseload. So 962 final dispositions. Of those, over 550 were paid in full even prior to any hearing. 374 cases that were heard were decided in LWF's favor, and then 10 cases were dismissed or decided in favor of the defendant. And many times with those dismissals, you've got, say, a husband and a wife, or 2 brothers, 1 dead deer, and so one confesses and said it's mine, and so the other one is dismissed. So just because it's a dismissal doesn't mean we didn't receive the amount for that animal. So I'm very proud of the efforts from my staff and from the agency of what we've been able to do here and protect this public trust resource. And I expect for it to continue to improve now that we've got an ability to hold people accountable.
Commissioner Smith? I just want to commend y'all on a great job. I do want, at some point, y'all to look at the FTEs involved in this and make sure that we're making money in terms of the time and effort that's put in. but, great job and.
I'd like to speak to that point. So right now we have an existing attorney who litigates every one of these. It's Alvin Landry. He's an attorney 3 in our shop. He also works on land acquisition. We did not hire any additional attorneys to do this, so he took that casework on and he's doing an excellent job. And we also have Mr. James Fontenot, who kind of leads the administration of this. So you're essentially looking at a 2-man shop, and 100% of Alvin's time isn't dedicated to this. This is something he took on. The only other thing I'll add to this that is good, beyond the ability for us to suspend and revoke licenses, we can go and make these executory in the 19th. So we can actually pursue collections if we so desired, if our collection rates aren't getting where we want to. So that's also a possibility now that we're bringing the due process in with our agency. So here's a look at the collections, the raw data, and also you can see the chart there at the bottom. That's civil restitution collections over time. And I'll just point out that dip there in 2019, I don't think is indicative of us not being able to collect. It's just unfinished. Thank you.
Al.
Commissioner Garrison?
Mr. Garrett, shouldn't it be that we should just have one model, and that is, if you don't pay it, your statement was, and I'm not trying to take this out of context, but you said if our collections are not where we want to be, we'll take. Shouldn't it be that everyone that they don't pay after it's been adjudicated, shouldn't every one of them go to the
So this goes back to Commissioner Smitko's cost benefit analysis here. We would have to pay court costs to go to a district court to make it executory, so then we could turn it over to collections. So currently with an ALJ ruling, we can revoke and suspend licenses. To many people, that's enough because they love to hunt and fish. We would actually need a district court ruling to send it to collections.
Why do we pay court costs as a state agency?
Because the Division of Administrative Law has to pay their folks, and the people who use them are.
File in district. If we take that and file in.
I understand.
Executory, I thought the state didn't pay for it.
I'll have to look into that. You may be right.
I'm not positive, but
And
let's check that, because we could just file them on us and.
right, and I think that's what. So again, this has been a year and a half or 2 years since inception. We're seeing how it's working, and we're now exploring what else we can do to enforce it. So I'll certainly look into that.
Is there any more to work?
No, sir. This concludes it.
Any more questions? Aaron, thank you. That was really informative. Appreciate it.
I know Commissioner McPherson's been asking for these numbers for a while, so I was glad to finally get them in front of y'all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 18, to receive and consider notice of intent to amend the Fish and Wildlife values. Dr. Jack Isaac.
Well, thank you, commissioners, for having me here today. Essentially, what I want to do is help explain the source of those numbers that we have here, and the notice of intent. And I'm going to bring up my presentation here. Now, my charge here again was to try to apply a formula that the agency and the commission had found years ago to update the civil restitution values. And we're trying here to put a dollar value on something that is very, very difficult to actually place a good dollar value on. You know, what is the value of an endangered species? What's the value of a pine snake or something like that? But my colleagues in academia could probably come up with lots of different answers, and it would take months and months and years to come up with these type of things. But we actually have to get something done. And about 10 years ago, the agency met and came up with a procedure for how to come up with a usable dollar value for several different categories of fish and wildlife that were taken illegally from the proper owners, the people of Louisiana, and the people of Louisiana deserve some compensation for that. So what I was asked to do here was just to go through and follow the procedure that had already been set in front of me. Fortunately, the committee that did this back in 2009 and 2010 left some pretty good notes on what they did. Not necessarily always on why they did it, but what they did. And so I was able to go through and to follow that procedure. It's a mixture of market data and other external data, and in some instances, just inflation adjusted values for these type of things. We're going to go through some numerical examples for how I came up with these things with the help of my colleagues and others. I'll just kind of briefly walk us through. Commercial fisheries, I think, is a good place to start because it is that one field where we do have some pretty good market values out there, where the market values actually, I think, reflect the value of the creatures to society. So the civil restitution value for 51 different types of seafood species or other types of animals were set according to this formula. It was a 4-year summation of the inflation adjusted real dockside value of the creatures. We did 4 years because you get a lot of fluctuation from years to year. You want to get something smooth out a little bit more long term. Divided by the total volume multiplied by a value added factor. Now that value added factor is trying to reflect the fact that the value of the creatures is not entirely encapsulated in dockside value, because these things go through processing and distributing and retail, which add value along the way. So that value added factor is calculated from using statistics from the Fisheries Economics of the United States 2016. And it is the, excuse me here for going through all this type of thing, the ratio of the retail value of Louisiana seafood once the processing value and the distributing value and retail value are kind of backed out, divided by the dockside value of the creatures. That ratio was 2.0 in 2019 or 2016, excuse me, a little bit lower than it was when we did this back in 2010. So here we have the 4-year cumulative dockside value of bluefin tuna divided by the 2015 to 2018 volume cumulatively, multiplied times that value added factor 2, and you come up with a value of actually $9.31 per pound. I was asked by Secretary Banks to round those down or up to the nearest 25 cents. So we come up with a value of $9.25 per pound. This is applied for shrimp and oysters and all sorts of critters, but not to species like the red drum and the red snapper and the spotted sea trout, which also have a substantial recreational fisheries. Those are handled separately. All right. The next big one is going to be game animals. Now, here we applied this formula that the committee, with the approval of the commission, put together back the last time we did this in 2010, 2011. And it's this formula, spending per day, using estimates from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that I'll walk you through in the next slide, times the ratio of the days per harvested animal over a 4-year span. That comes up with the value per animal. Now, I throw this formula in front of you because that days per harvested animal thing is the inverse of the harvest rate. Normally, we think of deers per day or days per hunter day. This is actually the inverse of this, and it's actually going to have a strange effect on the value of certain creatures here that I want to get to 2 slides from now. I'm going to kind of split that. So here we have the spending per day estimates from 2010 and to the 2018 value. Now, when it came to this 2018 value, I only had good statewide spending and participation estimates from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from 2011. In 2016, the numbers weren't available yet. The survey size was cut down a lot. There were changes at the federal level. So I had to go back to 2011 to get those values, and then I adjusted those dollar values for inflation. and you see the dollar values ahead of you, you'll actually see that the spending per day for big game and small game dropped. For migratory birds, it went up. And that's also going to have an effect on some of these creatures as we see. Here I'm going to walk you through an example here for deer. Now deer were classified as big game. So I want to come up with how we came up with that spending per day value. We took the cumulative amount of spending for big game according to the survey, adjusted for inflation, and made it $280.2 million. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there were 3.7 million days spent in pursuit of big game in Louisiana in that year. And the estimate, if you divide that, comes about $75.88 per day. Next, we want to apply that to days per animal harvested. Okay, according to our guys here in the Office of Wildlife, there were 10.6 million days spent hunting deer over 4 years. Over those 4 years, they harvested 429,500 deer, came up with a ratio of 24.68 days per deer. Multiply that times $75.88 per day. The days cancel out, and you come up with $1,872.71 per harvested deer. Now, the existing rule had a 25% markup for quality deer. Quality deer are defined in the rules. And so when we added 25% to that, we came up with a higher value for the quality deer. And I'm not going to go through too many numerical examples, but I did want to go through one here for rail and gallon rules, because when I applied this formula, you saw a substantial change in the value per harvested animal. And I just wanted to bring that up for your consideration, okay, just so that you're aware of it. All right. In 2010, there were 29,700, from 2007 to 2010, there were 27,900 days spent in pursuit of rails and gallinules. They harvested about 94,000 rail and gallinules. That came up to about 0.32 days per rail. Multiply that times spending of about $70 per day, and you came up with a value of about $22 per animal. Now, when I apply that same formula using 2015 to 2018 data, these are the results. And again, I just put these on the table so you know where these values come from, and you can consider whether this is something you would like to do. Okay. The number of days spent in pursuit of rail and gallinules over this 4-year span actually was higher for this later time span, but the harvest rate was lower. Only 40,900 rail collected during that 4-year period. So here you get an estimate of 1.08 days per rail. You multiply that times the higher spending per day, and you come up with an increase in the value per animal, of up to $111 per rail. And that was just an application of this formula. When you applied this same formula to geese, you also saw an increase in the value per geese, again, according to the application of this formula, and also for woodcock. So if you're looking through that, that sheet and you're wondering where that increase in value came from, this is where it came from, just from an application of that formula, which again was the charge placed in front of me. Okay. Okay, federally listed and endangered species. This is a lot easier, not quite so much math. Here, I just applied an increase in inflation from $2011 to $2018 using the CPI. That's the same adjustment formula that other state agencies use. And you saw here that the increases are about 11.5%. Now, there is, in the proposed rule here, a variation from this procedure for black bear that I want to draw to people's attention, okay? Back in 2011, when we proposed this, the agency suggested setting the value of a black bear at the same value for other endangered in threatened species and species of special concern. But the commission at that time said, no, we want to keep it $10,000 per bear, and that was their prerogative. If we apply the inflation adjustment value to that $10,000, the value of a black bear today, according to the old formula, would be about $11,160 per animal. That's my rough recollection. But we were at, Assistant Secretary Myers said, well, since the bear has been delisted, perhaps we could just apply the same value for other threatened and endangered species and species of special concern to the black bear. That again is something I just want to bring in front of your consideration. Okay, non-game animals. Here we had a mixture of different values. You can go through the different rules and see how these things were arrived at. For fur bearers, it's just based upon the market value of the pelts. Thank you to the Fur and Refuge Division for providing me that information. Alligators, it's based upon the market value of the skins and the meat. The value of the eggs is based upon actual bids that the department received for eggs on our WMAs. For frogs, turtles, and salamanders, here was one of those few instances where, again, we deviated from the previous procedure. At the request of Dr. Jeff Boundy, who is our state herpetologist, he suggested that we make our value consistent with that of our neighboring state, Texas. So he came up with a list of Texas civil restitution values for frogs, turtles, and salamanders. There are some other frogs that aren't covered, turtles that aren't covered in this. And also there is a subtle change from per pound to per animal as the basis of the fine. I think it's just more practical. Is that right, Doctor? Okay, it just makes it easier to go through. Marines and other mammals, we just applied the value of inflation to the previous value and came up with some answers there. Recreational and commercial fishes and turtles of special concern. Here we actually have some nice kind of realistic dollar values to apply here. For these five species of fish, under number 1, the American Fishery Society came up with a published list of the hatchery cost for raising fingerlings. We used those values and integrated them with some other population or stock estimates and adjusted the values for those. And those, again, are in the notice of intent for your consideration. The American Fishery Society did not produce updated estimates for red snapper, white trout, flounder, and croaker. So in those instances, we just adjusted the previous values for inflation. And for these 4 or 5 species of turtle that you see there on the list, we actually have some pretty good estimates for the yearly cost of raising these in LWF facilities. So we just applied our total annual cost for producing these critters in our own facilities to those animals and came up with the values that are in front of you and the notice of intent. And that summarizes what I have for you. And now I'd be very glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I really appreciate that. I love the going in the weeds like you have.
Hope I didn't bore too many people.
I've been fortunate enough to hear you do some at Oyster Task Force meetings. And so with that, Commissioner Smitko.
Yes.
I can tell you that I vehemently disagree with the value of the deer.
Very good.
When you're looking at $1,500,
yes,
as opposed to, I mean, deer are listed in the market bulletin. Of course, you have to have the permit, but you can get a market cost by that. You know, if somebody wants a 12 point, they can go to a hunting place and it might cost them $5,000, but they can go hunt it illegally and it's going to cost them $1,500. They're taking a $1,500 chance.
Right.
So I think we need to figure out some new math to calculate the value of an illegally taken deer. The other thing is, I disagree as well with the reduction in cost on black bear. And I think it needs to be figured in such a way that it is extremely prohibitive. It's not like you go to shoot you think you're shooting at a teal, you shoot a wood duck, and so instead of just leaving it, you put it in your bag and you caught one over. When you shoot a black bear, you know you're shooting a black bear.
I understand that.
And it needs to be prohibitively expensive. So other than that, thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Commissioner McPherson.
Y'all know I'm weird about the bears, but
They're very charismatic, ma'am. You're not alone in that. Mr. McPherson.
Hogs and bears look a lot alike.
no, they don't.
It would be interesting, Colonel, you may be able to do this out of the black bear killing that we had. I know I'm aware of bears climbing the utility pole and being electrocuted. Some of them get shot, but I know also there's been several people that mistakenly shot bears for hogs. And I don't know, but at some point, if you'd give us that information, I just think it'd be interesting. But that's not my point. They're game animals. We need to hunt them. Is she looking at me?
He does that just to, he knows where those buttons are.
What I asked to speak on was to agree with Commissioner Smitko, and we've talked about this before, and I actually had a conversation with staff over the past week, and they were kind enough to get together and look at it. And Dr. Isaac, you know, that was a great presentation, I understand that, but on your big game animals, it's what it costs that hunter when he buys his gas and his hamburger and his illegal deer scent and his other things to go into the field for a day is $75.
Yep.
And it completely ignores the millions of dollars of land that it takes in a few hundred acres per year, the value of that to harvest the deer off of it, right, whether it's public land or private land, and the value of that land on an annual rent basis or an annual amortization. And I just think it's becoming more and more prevalent. I've got game cameras that I've got pictures of spotlights coming through the woods, you know, and the last light is shining on the game camera, you know. But it is that the value is what it costs to either grow one of these trophy bucks. And if you look at the back wall back there, if I understood what Scott told me, that buck on the left would be what we're calling a quality buck.
Yep.
Is that correct, Scott? And that buck on the right, which, am I remembering right, one of those bucks was illegally harvested, is the one on the right? So those two bucks have exactly the same value. And I really believe that if they're out there trying to kill, and I know I'm aware of a case where they took and they killed a trophy buck, didn't seize the head for whatever reason that escapes me, didn't take the gun for whatever reason that escapes me, and they paid the civil restitution for that trophy buck, very similar to that one right there, and knew exactly what they were doing, and they got to pay whatever it was, $1,500 for a buck similar to that one on the right. And to that person out there in Tier 1 DMAP trying to grow that, you get to kill one of those in a lifetime, or you get to kill one every 5 years, and you've invested tens of thousands of dollars in that animal. But the poacher can go out there, and what's a chance, Colonel? Don't answer this. What's the chance of him getting caught?
Yeah.
I asked you to be quiet. I didn't want you to lie publicly. The chances are slim and none of him getting caught, you know. So I mean, that's the realities to it. But I still want that issue to be revisited, and I told Scott and them that I was going to bring it up again today, and I appreciate Commissioner Smitko beating me to the punch.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we ought to look at, if you take it off of a DMAP club, or if it's taken off of that, there's another deal. Or what Scott and I talked about, maybe instead of that being a quality buck, it ought to be that, and still by the valuations, it still only goes up a small amount. Instead $1,800 or $2,500, it might be $3,000 or something. And the other fact that I kind of agonize over, I don't know if there's a deterrent value, if there's a deterrent effect based upon what we're going to collect in our restitution. In other words, a person that goes out there and poaches and commits these offenses, he's probably not going to say, well, I'm not going to go because it's $5,000 as opposed to $2,000. So I kind of agonize over that a little bit. But still, I think, like Commissioner Smitko does, there ought to be some difference in those true quality deer that people are spending a tremendous amount of money and going to a lot of effort to grow and realize the potential that we have in Louisiana for growing those type of trophy animals, where you've got more Louisiana deer in Rack Magazine. Did everybody get their December issue of Rack Magazine? There was a beautiful deer in it.
Are you in it, Joe? I'm sure.
But that does need to be looked at, and I would appreciate if we'd revisit that in some way, instead of just what it costs to go out in the field for a day. What is the land value and what is the cost of planting food plots and all that goes into growing that deer?
Insurance.
Yeah. All right. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Assistant Secretary Meyer.
I just want to add, maybe some information for Commissioner Thurston to add, and that, that was one of the challenges the committee had this time. The challenge we had in 2011 is how do you bring that land value in? Because this, that could be added, also consideration for how much people spend on managing for waterfowl. Certainly that value that we get on how much people are spending, it doesn't capture how much that control structure costs. How much taxes did I pay to, own this property? So that is common throughout this whole process. And again, we're using information that the best information that we have in order to come up with a value, but also within reason. And to Ms. Smitko's question or concern about, you can go pay $5,000 to shoot in this pen, or, this 150 class animal or 175. Again, those animals at that time are considered livestock. They're not free ranging. They're not, part of what the hunters are willing to pay, to go hunt and lease a piece of property to shoot a deer and then work through the DMAP program or whatever, to accomplish those goals. So I understand what you're saying, and I think that's the challenge that the committee has had is.
If you're cheating, you ought to pay that price. I mean, if you're going out there with a bulleye at night, and all my bucks apparently waltz around at night, but if you're going out there with a bulleye at night, it's like you're going in a high fence, okay? You're cheating. And you ought to pay the cheating price. Anyway, it's something that really bothers me.
I thank you very much. We are going to be able to amend this NOI.
Yes, sir.
And if there are, just like with the black bear and what was done back when they put the dollar figure on that, if, this commission determines that that they want to go ahead and change a value, that can be easily done by amendment. So with that being said, Commissioner Corbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Isaac, and it kind of gets into some of this. Is there a way to capture the management values and all that other stuff? And before you answer that, my next question goes to General Counsel Garrett. At what part of the process do we have to justify these values? I mean, I'm assuming we have to justify it in front of a judge. Let's say we decide to go arbitrarily and just raise the prices to whatever we think it is, and the judge says, well, prove it. Is that what this exercise is really about?
Yes.
All right, so why can't we justify kind of where Commissioner Smitko and Commissioner McPherson are going to get an animal from point A to point B? You can justify and quantify the land management values and the time you spent, the diesel, all that other stuff, it's a little different than just how much people are spending to go. Maybe we can look at this whole thing, because from my standpoint, if you're asking me to support this NOI as written, I'm going to vote no. I might get outvoted, and that's fine. It's happened a bunch of times. It doesn't bother me, but I'd be more comfortable defending how much does it cost to manage a piece of property, and then factor that into what a deer value is, or replacement value of a squirrel, a rabbit, a turkey, a duck. Because frankly, it bothers me that if I somehow stomp on a box turtle, somebody's going to charge me $541. I can go out and shoot ducks all day for $41 a lick. I mean, hell, I'm not too bright, but I can figure that one out. And we've got to somehow find a new way. I appreciate what you did. I understand your method of thinking, but I'm in the land management business, and it costs a lot more than $41 to get ducks. Now, I didn't produce the duck, but I guarantee you go up to Canada, find out how much it costs to manage that property, prevent its conversion from native grass to agriculture. These numbers are going to skyrocket, and I think you could legitimately justify that in front of a judge.
Just real quick.
So that's all I have to say. But whenever y'all ready, I'm ready to vote, but I'm voting no.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Corville. Mr. Garrett.
I don't know if Commissioner Cornville has a question to you.
You just nodded, that's all I know.
Arbitrary, capricious standard.
Right.
The one you're looking for. Of course, we get deference to interpret our own
rules, but the exercise that y'all are going through right now is going to be the evidence and the proof we point to say that this is legitimate, this isn't arbitrary, and certainly the way that Dr. Isaacs has provided to y'all is a tried and true standard. It's been that way since the 2011. Well, at least they've been applied and upheld by both district courts and ALJs. But certainly it's not the only way.
I'd probably be willing to bet my house that Dr. Isaacs looked at all the other values that all the other states are using. And
I did have a look at them, but actually, Commissioner Robert, my a charge here from the assistant secretaries was to pretty much apply the formula as it was. But I would be happy to deviate from that at your suggestion.
Yeah, they've got a new way of defending it in court, and their number's higher than ours, then there's no reason we need to reinvent the wheel. But I understand the need to maintain the process. But I appreciate what your effort.
Thank you, Commissioner Smitko. And
Yeah, real briefly. For somebody to complain, let's say that a duck was $250. For somebody to complain about that, they'd have to bring up they'd have to allege it was unconstitutional at the hearing, at the civil restitution hearing, correct?
They would have to allege that we were basing that on arbitrary and capricious standard, and that we couldn't.
That it was unconstitutional, though, because it was arbitrary and capricious, right?
I don't know that the constitutionality would have to be challenged.
Well, how would they challenge the value?
They'd challenge the commission's overstepped its ability to establish values based
Which is
on
constitutionality. You acted outside the scope of your authority as a commission, and you set this arbitrary. Anyway, number one, rarely going to happen because it'd be cost prohibitive for somebody to bring that challenge. Number two, as long as we have something behind it, something to say, oh, we weren't arbitrary and capricious. We had an economist look at it, and he.
Well, again, I will say,
anyway,
we've got one way to do it. There are many other ways to arrive at the values. This was
and I think we need to jack them way up, and I'm going to ask that this matter be tabled until we.
Commissioner McPherson, and then I'm going to go ahead.
Of course, sir.
So I don't forget to say that. Let us recognize that if we don't take action, it stays the way it was. So at some point, we've got to take action. And the staff has done an excellent job of trying to move this forward at our request, and we appreciate that, and we compliment you. We just would like for you to look a little harder.
My pleasure.
And Dr. Isaacs, you kind of opened the door, but somebody's got to ask you the right question. When you looked at those other states, you were asked to do it this way. Did you see any other state that was doing it that would come closer to what we're trying to accomplish?
There were several different ways that other states evaluated these things. And I would be happy to join my colleagues and engage in a thorough review of what the other states have done so that we can address your questions a bit more thoroughly.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for.
Absolutely. Now, if I could perhaps.
California, there's.
Oh, gosh. That's, now, if I could get some guidance from the commission on the particular species that you're concerned about, that would help me economize my time, so to speak.
Thank you, Doctor. I
Yes.
think Assistant Secretary Banks.
I don't know that I have a lot.
Okay,
I'm
well,
just
that's
trying to bring us back together.
I wasn't finished.
We're not necessarily here to debate you guys on the right way or the wrong way. This is the way we did it. It is up to you guys on what you want to put as the value. This is completely up to you. So if you want to increase the value, if you want to amend the NOI, I would suggest you go ahead and do it and get it amended to something you can support.
If I can, I would suggest that I think what Commissioner Smitko has led us to maybe table us to the next meeting, give us a couple of, give us just a little time to go through each of these things and then try to come back to this commission next month with something that, rather than amending it, this particular one right now would have a little bit more understanding of this because this is a significant change.
Yes, it is.
This is almost 10 years in the making. So, with that, we want to make sure that we give it enough time to do it justice. So if one of the commissioners would suggest.
I have one more point before we table it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
There's something in this NOI that hadn't been discussed, and that's the Secretary's authority to assess and settle civil restitution penalties. Is that new, given that authority?
The language is new. I would argue and have argued in the past that the authority is applied, just as the district attorney has the ability to look at cases that comes before him and exercise discretion on which cases he brings to trial or not. I would argue that we have that authority, but I think it's appropriate to make it clear that in the administration of equity and justice, that the Secretary have that explicit authority.
So the Secretary could dismiss the civil restitution. He could lower the civil restitution.
Correct. Again, in the same manner that if a district attorney, which does have statutory authority to seek these, could amend or decide not to bring it. I certainly think that the numbers that we provided you in our document shows that that's not something that happens frequently at all.
That was my next question, but it has happened, but it's infrequent.
Correct.
And it would be better to give the Secretary that authority instead of the administrative law judge?
So the judge, in my experience, will rely on whether sufficient notice was made and whether the animal was in possession or taken, and they will not exercise their ability to, or they don't necessarily believe they have the ability to adjust it thereafter if they found.
The question was, he's the one that's listening to the facts that's presented on that day. Should we be giving it to that individual as opposed to the Secretary?
I don't believe so, and I don't believe that they would take it. Their charge is to say, did sufficient evidence show that the animal was taken and that restitution is owed? And if so, they're going to apply the values here.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion to take no action on this item and to add it to the agenda in March. I mean, in February.
I would pass it. I'm gonna move, take no action, and then we add it to the agenda in March.
Okay.
One more time.
We have a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me,
Did you
Robert.
ever answer Dr. Isaac's question about whether you have any specific species?
Please do.
Are we just gonna, how we want to handle that? To give him some guidance?
Well, let's just finish with this motion, and then I think that Commissioner Corville we have a motion on the floor. I have a second to that motion.
I'll second.
We have a second by Commissioner Corville. Commissioner Corville, you wanted to add something?
But to Assistant Secretary, Deputy Secretary Shadowin, I don't remember what you said. Mr. Shadowin. Dr. Isaac, for me personally, I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else, but I would, if you had to prioritize, I'd pick game species, both wildlife and fish, and then I would move down to I'm not an anti-box turtle guy, but I'm not that worried about them, and I don't know that there are a whole lot of people out there outside of the commercial take on the federal lands. But I would think of potentially of recreational value would be my personal highest priority. Then I guess I don't really differentiate if a red snapper is caught illegally by a recreational fisherman or a commercial fisherman. The fish value is still the same. So I wouldn't differentiate, but I would pick, in my mind, sort of a game fish, highly pursued species. And maybe if we had to pick it to not be arbitrary, you would look perhaps the frequency of violations by species type if you really were desperate to narrow it down. But you're a professional and got a good staff. I'm sure
I do
you
have a
guys
good
can knock it out.
I know you're not a turtle guy, but apparently, as I understand, there's a huge black market for certain species of turtle that are shipped to China and stuff. So we have to kind of keep that in mind as a prohibitive.
Right. But there's
Okay.
the frequency
My wife
of
would agree with
violation
you,
is not,
Commissioner.
it's not that of all the other species.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That's that way. If you're looking for priorities, my priority is
Deer,
that.
bear, duck.
Thank you. I think that individually we might want to send some recommendations to Dr. Isaacson. In the meantime, we have a motion on the floor to move this to the March meeting and take no action today. Hearing no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's what we're going to do. Thank you very much, Dr. Isaacson. It's been very informative.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate your time. And I do want to, before I go, thank Mr. Samani for all the good things he's done on this commission and the personal help that he has given me in some of my past research. I do appreciate that, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to move on to 19, the election of chairman and vice chairman. I'd like to open the floor to nominations for the chairman.
Chairman,
Commissioner Salmon.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Hogan.
We have with that,
Ask for unanimous second.
which way would, I was going to say, with that, I'd like to close the nominations. And with that, I take a vote on the nominee. All in favor of Commissioner Hogan being the next chairman? Opposed? New chairman, thank you. Congratulations, Commissioner Hogan. Like to open the.
I'm sorry. You need a roll call vote or you good? Okay. Says we will.
Yeah.
That's what they would do.
Okay, excuse me, we'll go ahead and take the roll.
The chair declared election by acclamation.
Yeah.
Are we done? Are we have?
Yeah, I don't believe you need a roll call vote unless y'all can point me to where you're seeing that. I'm in Article 4 of the bylaws.
Appendix A. Number one,
Do it right.
elections procedures shall be by roll call vote.
In that case, y'all got a different appendix that I was looking at in the bylaws. So yeah, let's do it by
Okay.
appendix A. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Thank you very much. We have not taken an action there. We have a nominee. I'm
I
sorry.
didn't formally have a second. I asked for unanimous second, and then you went.
I said
No.
no second.
So just so we can all be on the same page, the chair
Okay.
entertains nominations for chairman. That has been done. Any number may be nominated. In this instance, we have one. There is no second required, but the procedure shall be by roll call vote.
Okay, so with that, Secretary Falcon, will you take the roll on the voting for the chairman that's been nominated?
Jerry Smith.
Yay.
I'm sorry, I'd like to stop us. On C, it says if there's only one nominee, then the chairman will declare it by acclamation. So
Okay, so I'm going to declare by acclamation that we have a new chairman, and thank you very much. Commissioner Hogan, you're going to be our new chairman. With that, I'm going to open up the floor to nominations for the vice chairman. Commissioner McPherson.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Smitko as vice chairman.
With that, I close the floor to nominations and with that, all in favor? Declared through acclamation. Commissioner Smitko has been voted to be our vice chairman for the upcoming year. Thanks for all the help with Robert's Rules of Order and all of our bylaws. I appreciate that. And I'm happy to come close to turning over the gavel to our new chair. Yeah, the time of our the February meeting in February. And that's what we're going to take on first. What time is going to be our meeting in Ruston? Anyone have a suggestion? I'd say 9:30. 9:30 for our meeting in Ruston in February, and then any commissioners have a date for May commission meeting.
I have a question. I know I'm getting off of it. Will the legislature be in session?
yeah, March 9th, I believe, is when it begins.
So for May, it will be in session?
Yes.
So we can't have.
So May 7th, May 7th, 9:30 a.m. in Baton Rouge.
Just to be clear, you can establish the date here, and then when we put the notice out for the meeting in advance, we can set the venue and the time.
They have to be in that.
Depending on committee hearings and that kind of stuff, which I believe is where Commissioner Samity was going.
Okay, we're going to suggest that the meeting in May will be on the 7th, and we'll set the time later. That's a good, okay, everyone agrees with that. With that, we don't have any public comment cards, and time to adjourn.
All right.